Greetings, cozy knights. Lower your swords and rest by the fire. Tonight, we journey through the deepest, most unsolved mysteries buried within Dark Souls 3. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're listening from tonight, and what games you want me to cover next, and subscribe if this helps you sleep. What the deep actually is. This is perhaps the central unanswered question of Dark Souls 3's cosmology. The abyss in the original game was the darkness within humanity, the raw, wild potential of the dark soul, threatening to overflow and consume everything. It was dangerous, but also in some sense authentic, tied to the nature of what human beings are in the soul's universe. The deep seems different. The deep is described in ways that suggest depth without direction. Not an uprising of darkness, but a settling of it, a sinking. Aldrich's visions are of the sea. The deacons of the deep carry items that describe the deep as something that has become a repository for all things repulsive. It is where things go that have nowhere else to go. The monsters that populate the cathedral's swamp and the surrounding areas are not the sharp, purposeful darkness of the abyss. They are bloated, slow, aquatic in feeling. Things that have spent a long time in something cold and deep and still. The most compelling scholarly theory on the deep is that it is the abyss after it has aged, after the wild darkness of humanity has settled and grown still and cold, after the hot terror of the abyss has become the cold resignation of something that has given up moving toward the surface. The deep is not an attack. The deep is what happens when everything stops fighting. Aldrich's body transformation. By the time the events of Dark Souls 3 begin, Aldrich is no longer recognizably human in any way. He has consumed enough souls, enough people, enough gods, that his physical body has transformed into something that cannot hold a shape. A vast, flowing sludge of dark matter and accumulated flesh, barely contained within a humanoid impression. He moves by flowing. He attacks by projecting arrow light from a form that phases between solid and liquid. The soul of Aldrich's description notes that he had long ago bloated into a gigantic sludge-like creature as a result of his habit of eating people. The grotesque physical logic of this is deliberate. Aldrich did not become a monster through combat or a curse or divine punishment. He became a monster through appetite. He ate until eating changed what he was. The transformation is the most literal possible consequence of consuming other people's souls, rendered in entirely literal terms. When you find him in Anor Londo, slowly flowing around the remnants of Gwyndolin, using the consumed god's power as an appendage, the visual of it is almost meditative. A thing that was once a person, who decided that consuming people was holy, now unable to hold any shape that isn't consumption. He is what his own theology predicted. The deep, in the end, does not drown you from outside, it fills you up. The deacons' covenant with darkness. The deacons of the deep did not simply follow Aldrich. They made a choice. They were members of the Way of White, the oldest covenant in the series, associated with healing, with protection of the undead, with the most basic human desire to prevent suffering. And they looked at Aldrich's vision of the deep and decided it was true, or inevitable, or both. The conversion of the Cathedral of the Deep from a place of healing to a place of consumption happened gradually, through persuasion, through the slow replacement of one theology with another that used many of the same vestments. The deacons still wear their white robes. They still carry their staffs. They move in clusters around the cathedral, performing what look from the outside like rites of devotion. But what they are devoted to by the time you arrive is something that started with one cleric deciding that eating people was a spiritual act. The tragedy of the deacons is not that they were evil, it is that they were convinced. The Deep's theology is internally coherent. If you accept the premise that the age of fire is ending and something cold and vast is replacing it, the Church of the Deep's rituals are a rational adaptation. The horror is that a rational adaptation to an ending world can still look, from close enough, like faith. Rosaria's secret alliance. In the Cathedral of the Deep, among all the deacons and the accumulated darkness, there is another presence. Rosaria, Mother of Rebirth. She presides over the Rosaria's Fingers covenant from a room within the cathedral itself, close enough to Aldrich's resting place that her proximity seems deliberate. The alliance is strange at first. Rosaria's Fingers are tongue hunters. They bring the tongues of killed Dark Moon blades and blue sentinels to Rosaria as tribute, and in return, Rosaria offers the ability to respect your character or change your appearance. She does not speak. She has no tongue herself. The connection between the tongue-hunting covenant and the Cathedral of the Deep is made more explicit when you discover that Archdeacon MacDonald, one of Aldrich's highest-ranking servants, belonged to the Rosaria's Fingers covenant. The deacons who allied with Aldrich and the Fingers who brought tongues to Rosaria were operating through the same institutional network. What Rosaria wanted from this arrangement, whether she was a victim of the cathedral's corruption or a willing participant in it, is never stated. She offers her services to anyone who kneels before her, regardless of affiliation, and her silence makes her impossible to read. In a game full of people who talk too much, Rosaria's wordlessness is its own kind of mystery. Who is Carthy behind the scenes? In the original Dark Souls, there were two primordial serpents, Frampt, who guided the chosen undead toward linking the fire, and Kada, who urged the player to refuse the linking and embrace the dark. By the time of Dark Souls 3, neither serpent is directly visible, but Cartha's work is everywhere. Yuria of Londor, when killed, speaks a dying confession. Kada, I have failed thee. The Sable Church of Londor, the organization that recruits hollow undead and shapes them toward the usurpation of fire ending, exists at Cartha's direction. The Lord of Hollows ending, where the Ashen One claims the first flame instead of linking it, becoming the ruler of a kingdom of hollow things, is Cartha's goal, the same goal he had in the first game, still being pursued through proxies 1,000 years later. What Cartha actually wants from an age of dark, what he believes will happen if hollows rule, what his own nature as a primordial serpent actually is. All of this is as unanswered in the third game as in the first. The serpents are not human and not divine, and not undead in any recognizable sense. They are older than the categories the game uses, and their agenda has been running for the entire length of the series without ever being stated plainly. Carty may be the most consequential figure in Dark Souls, who never once explains himself. The three sisters of the Sable Church. Yuria of Londor is the figure you interact with directly if you pursue the Lord of Hollows questline. She is one of three founders of the Sable Church, 3 sisters, each of them devoted to the idea that Hollows deserve a ruler, that the Age of Dark is coming, and that it should arrive on Londor's terms. Yuria's additional dialogue when you have progressed through the ashes of Ariandel DLC reveals something striking. Sister Frida, the boss of the Painted World, was one of those 3 founders. She abandoned Londor. She renounced her hollow nature, fled into the Painted World of Ariandel, and chose isolation over the mission she helped build. Yuria's tone when speaking of Frida is the closest she comes to open contempt. Frida chose sentiment and retreat over the grand project of the Hollow Kingdom. The third sister is never named directly. She is an absence, a gap in the triumvirate, someone who was present at the founding of the Sable Church and whose current location and state are unknown. Three sisters, one still running the church, one hiding in a painting, one somewhere else. The mystery of the third sister is one of the cleanest unexplained gaps in the game's entire structure. Yoel's willing death. Yoel of Lundor is a small, humble pilgrim you find near the undead settlement, the only survivor among a group of pilgrims who all died on the road to Lothric. He asks to serve you. He offers to draw out your true strength, giving you free levels in exchange for dark sigils, marks of hollowing that accumulate in your inventory and make you more hollow with every death. He's cheerful about this, unnervingly cheerful. After you have received all 5 sigils, Yoel dies, simply and cleanly, without drama. His final words, spoken if you have collected all 5 sigils before his death, are, "I thank you kindly, our kindest Lord." He was not killed. He was not attacked. He completed what he came to do, and then he was done. The interpretation that the community has settled on is that Yoel's death was always the plan, that drawing out the sigils, transferring the dark marks from his soul to yours, was the act of a man who knew he was dying and wanted to spend what was left of him on something useful. He was already at the end. He chose where to spend it. That is not a small thing in a world where most people either rage against their end or simply forget to notice it happening. Yoel noticed. He planned. And when you speak to Yuria after, she confirms that his soul has been redeemed. He got what he came for. Elfrida's betrayal of Lundor. Sister Frida stands as the final boss of the Ashes of Ariandel DLC, and she is one of the most complex figures in the game. She presents herself to the player as a pacifist, urging you to leave the painted world to its gentle decay, insisting that the ash of the old world is preferable to the violence of renewal. She says she gave up everything to find peace here. What she gave up was the Sable Church of Lundor, the organization she helped found with Yuria and the unnamed third sister, the project of building a kingdom for the Hollow. She walked away from it, or was driven from it, or both. Yuria's dialogue after you have fought and killed Frida is clipped and final. She speaks of Elfrida's history with Lundor and says simply that she renounced her hollowed nature and gave us the slip. There is something in that phrase, gave us the slip, that suggests this was not a disagreement over strategy, but a desertion under pressure, a vanishing that the remaining sisters still resent. What made Elfrida leave? What did she see in the direction Lundor was heading that made her prefer to rot in a painted snow? Was her pacifism in the DLC genuine? Or was it another form of control? Keeping the painted world frozen, keeping the ash from being disturbed, ensuring that no new world was painted to replace the old one. These questions persist after her death. What the Lord of Hollows would rule. The Usurpation of Fire ending is the most mechanically demanding ending in Dark Souls 3, requiring you to follow Yoel's questline through to completion. Marry Henri in the dark of Anor Londo, accumulate 8 dark sigils, and defeat the Soul of Cinder before interacting with the bonfire. If you do all of this, the Ashen One seizes the first flame and becomes the Lord of Hollows, a ruler of a kingdom of hollow things, of the undead and the forgotten and the lost. Yuria appears as a summon for the final boss. She kneels afterward, and then the screen goes to an ending that is, in terms of visual spectacle, the least dramatic of the 3. a figure surrounded by hollows, sitting on a throne. The Lord of Hollows ending is widely theorized to be Carthy's ultimate victory. The result he has been working towards since the first game. But what it actually means for the world going forward is deeply unclear. Hollows, in the Souls mythology, are people who have lost their purpose and their memory. A kingdom of hollows ruled by someone who chose hollowness rather than having it happen to them is either a profound act of solidarity or the most nihilistic possible conclusion to the cycle. Carthy never explains why he wants this. The ending never shows what comes next. You sit on the throne and the game ends, and the age of dark, whatever it is, begins. Henri's secret gender mystery. Henri of Astora is a wandering knight you meet in several locations throughout the game, always accompanied by their companion Horace, always pursuing Aldrich with a personal intensity that eventually becomes grief. Henri's gender is coded by the game based on yours. If you play as male, Henri is female. If you play as female, Henri is male. This is primarily a mechanical accommodation for the wedding sequence in Uria's questline, which requires the player to marry a character of the opposite gender in order to complete the ritual. The mystery is not which gender Henri really is. The game is deliberate about maintaining both as equally canonical. The mystery is about what the wedding itself means. In the Dark Moon Tomb, in the space where Gwyndolin once presided, a pilgrim from Londor kills Henri and replaces them. Your new spouse is a hollow controlled by Londor, positioned as the final piece of the Lord of Hollows ritual. If you allow this to happen, you are marrying a puppet. If you kill the pilgrim first, you save Henri and lose the hollow ending. The wedding, an act that appears in both the deepest dark of Anor Londo and the most cynical manipulation of Londor's agenda, remains one of the strangest and most ambiguous events in the game. Whether Henri understood what was being planned for them is never addressed. The pilgrim who kills in the dark, the church of Yoshka in Irital of the Boreal Valley, contains a covenant altar and a tower where company Captain Yoshka is imprisoned. Among the players who kneel before that altar is a Londor pilgrim, one of the masked, hunched figures from Yol's homeland, who appear in small clusters near the undead settlement and the cathedral. This particular pilgrim is part of Uria's plan. If you have been following the Lord of Hollows questline, this pilgrim is responsible for killing Henri during the road to Irithyll and replacing their presence in the Dark Moon Tomb with a hollow puppet. If you kill the pilgrim in the church of Yoshka before Henri reaches that point, you can save Henri, but you lose the hollow ending permanently. The pilgrim says nothing. They simply kneel and wait for you to make a choice, without explaining what the choice is. The mechanics of this moment are the mechanics of the entire Londor quest line compressed into one small figure. A hollow person doing a hollow god's work, silently positioning the pieces of a plan they had no hand in designing. The pilgrim is the cost of Uria's gratitude made visible. Every kindness the Sable Church offers has a pilgrim kneeling somewhere in the dark, waiting for the right moment. What the Dark Sigil really means. The Dark Sigil is described as a black gaping hole in the flesh that resembles the brand of an undead. It is the mark of hollowing, the accumulation of the curse made visible as a wound that never closes. When you accept sigils from Yol, you are accepting hollowing as a condition of your existence, agreeing to become more hollow with every death. The description adds something crucial. The darkness of humanity seeps from this bottomless pitch-black hole. The Dark Sigil is not simply a mark or a brand. It is an opening. Something is leaving through it. The the darkness of humanity. That particular phrase, from the original games, carrying the weight of everything the abyss and the dark sign and the curse of undeath represent, is draining out of you every time you die. The 8 sigils you can accumulate for the hollow ending represent an enormous opening, an enormous drain. The Lord of Hollows, at the end of the quest line, has had so much humanity seep out of them that they become something new. Not quite undead, not quite hollow in the mindless sense, but something else. Something that the Age of Dark apparently requires. The sigils are not a corruption imposed from outside. They are an invitation to empty yourself on purpose, slowly, with full knowledge of what you are giving away. The soul of Artorias, reborn, the soul of the blood of the wolf, the item you receive upon defeating the Abyss Watchers, can be transposed into either the Farron Greatsword or the Wolf Knight's Greatsword. The second weapon, the Wolf Knight's Greatsword, is described as the weapon of the Abyss Watchers, but is simultaneously the recognizable blade of Artorias the Abyss Walker from the original game. The soul's item description confirms that the massive soul of the Undead Legion contains the power of a wolf blood master, which is understood to be Artorias given the weapon it produces. What this implies about the relationship between the Watchers and Artorias goes beyond simple reverence. Souls in the Dark Souls universe are known to reincarnate across ages, the same essential soul reasserting itself through different people in different times. The reading that the Abyss Watchers collectively contain a reincarnation of Artorias' soul, distributed across many bodies rather than residing in one, is widely accepted as the most coherent explanation for the boss fight's mechanics. It would explain why they share a body in the second phase. One soul, many vessels, pulling toward unity. It would also explain why they fight each other in the first phase. When the Abyss touches members who shared that wolf blood bond, all of them feel it. The oath against the Abyss does not recognize its own carriers as exceptions. That reading remains a scholarly inference drawn from the soul description and the game's established rules about reincarnation, rather than an explicit confirmation. But it is the reading the game's environmental and item details most consistently support. Why they fight each other. The first phase of the Abyss. Watcher's boss fight presents something genuinely unusual. The enemies you are fighting are also fighting each other. Additional Watchers rise from the ground throughout the encounter, and some of them turn on the main boss rather than on you. The ones with glowing red eyes are the ones attacking the others. Red eyes, throughout Dark Souls 3, consistently mark a creature as touched by the Abyss. The Abyss Watchers dedicated their existence to eliminating the Abyss wherever it appeared. Their oath was absolute. Their methodology was radical. They would destroy an entire kingdom on the first sign of contamination. No exceptions, no mercy. And then the contamination was within them. The very wolf blood that connected their souls, that made them effective against the Abyss, also created a shared vulnerability. When the Abyss touched one of them, it touched all of them. The ones with red eyes are fighting the uncontaminated Watchers because the oath demands it. The oath does not have an exception for when the source of contamination is yourself. They are executing their own principles against themselves endlessly, because they cannot stop, and because stopping would mean the Abyss wins. It is one of the most quietly horrible expressions of uncompromising commitment in any game. A group of people who believe so completely in their cause that they could not stop doing it, even when the cause was destroying them. Farron Keep is Ulasile. The location of Farron Keep in relation to the original Dark Souls geography is a question the game answers through environmental details rather than explicit statement. Ulakal, the ancient township consumed by the Abyss in the Artorias of the Abyss DLC, was located in what the first game called Darkroot Garden. The ancient, overgrown forest below the upper undead burg, Farron Keep, is a swamp, covered in festering growth, home to decaying mushrooms that match the species found in Ulasil. The Crystal Sages of the Keep are identified as successors to Big Hat Logan's crystal sorcery tradition, a tradition that was already ancient in the first game. There are Grus, degenerated beings who might, at their most generous reading, be the distant descendants of the Ulakal people themselves, corrupted across centuries of proximity to the Abyss. The wolf blood of the Abyss Watchers connects directly to Sif the Wolf and Artorias' legacy. Beneath Farron Keep, through the catacombs, lies the smouldering lake, a geography that overlaps with what the first game placed below Darkroot. The argument that Farron Keep is the future of Ulasil, the same land grown over with centuries of growth and corruption, is one of the most well-evidenced geographical theories in Dark Souls 3, assembled entirely from the kind of quiet details the series plants and trusts its players to eventually find. Hawkwood's desertion. Hawkwood the Deserter sits in Firelink Shrine from the beginning of the game, slumped near the bottom of the central stairs, greeting you with the exhausted pragmatism of someone who has made a choice they neither regret nor entirely believe in. He was an Abyss Watcher. His armor matches the Legion's, minus the distinctive helm, an absence that may be symbolic of his departure. He knew the wolf blood, he knew the oath, and he left before the Legion's corruption ran its full course, before the wolf blood dried up, before Farron was consumed. He describes the undead Legion with the specific knowledge of someone who was inside it, and the specific disgust of someone who watched what it became. His desertion raises a question. How many others left? He's identified as the deserter, which implies it is his defining characteristic, which in turn implies it was rare enough to be remarkable. What was it he saw or foresaw that made him leave? He eventually challenges you to single combat in the game's back half, demanding the path of the dragon gesture as a form of ritual conclusion to his own arc. He wanted to become a dragon, or to understand what it meant to pursue the path of the dragon, and his final bow is to whatever thing you carry after Archdragon Peak. He died deserting one legacy and searching for another, which is perhaps the most honest thing anyone does in Dark Souls 3. The Dark Wraiths at the Fog Gate, immediately before the Fog Gate that leads to the Abyss Watcher's boss room in Farron Keep, there are two Dark Wraiths fighting the Grus of the Keep. Dark Wraiths are the servants of Kati from the first Dark Souls, former members of the Four Kings Knights who accepted the Darksign's corruption and Kator's deal in exchange for power. They are enemies of the Abyss Watchers by ideology. The Watchers fight to contain the Abyss. The Dark Wraiths serve and spread it. They should not be cooperating. But here they are, apparently pushing toward the same boss room you are approaching, fighting through enemies that stand in the way of both of you. The most dramatic reading is that they are attempting to reach and destroy the Abyss Watchers themselves. That some agenda of Kate's or the Old Kings requires eliminating the Legion, but the more measured reading is that the Watchers are already corrupted, already fighting each other in the room beyond the Fog Gate, and that the Dark Wraiths are not attacking the same enemies you will fight, but simply inhabiting the same space in which the Abyss's influence is already running free. The Abyss is already there. The Dark Wraiths are already home. The symmetry of the scene, the Abyss Watchers and the Dark Wraiths converging on the same point from opposite directions, is the kind of visual rhyme the Souls series uses instead of plot summary. The Wolfblood's true source. The undead legion drank wolfblood to gain the power to fight the abyss and to share in the soul of Artorias. But where did the wolfblood actually come from? In Farron Keep, high above the swamp, there is a room housing the old wolf of Farron, an ancient giant wolf sleeping in what the Covenant associated with the Watchers treats as a shrine. The old wolf is the source. He shares his essence with those who prove themselves worthy of the Covenant. He is, in the most literal interpretation, the spiritual successor to Sif, Artorias' companion, or perhaps Sif's soul in a later form, carrying forward the connection between wolfhood and the fight against the abyss. What makes this a mystery is the nature of the sharing. The wolf blood is described as a binding. It connected the Watcher's souls, distributed Artorias' reincarnated essence between multiple bodies, created the shared soul dynamic that makes the boss fight both beautiful and tragic. The old wolf gave the Legion the power to carry one soul between many bodies. What did he want in return? What does a sleeping wolf the size of a room housed in a shrine above an abyss-soaked swamp want from the undead who drink from his veins? The Covenant gives you curved swords and ring rewards. What the wolf wanted from the arrangement is never explained. Why all firekeepers are disabled. Every firekeeper in the series has suffered a significant impairment. In Dark Souls 1, Anastasia of Astora had her tongue cut out and her feet removed. The Daughter of Chaos was gravely ill from prolonged exposure to the flame of chaos. The Dark Moon, Nitess, concealed something terrible beneath her brass armor. The item description mentions a ghastly form and hideous swarms of humanity. In Dark Souls 3, the firekeeper who tends your bonfire is blind. All her predecessors, whose bodies fill the tower behind Firelink, were also blind. The Fextralife wiki notes, whether the reason is cultural or biological is unclear. It is unclear because the game never explains it. The most widely accepted theory is that the disability is intentional, that whoever or whatever controls the Firekeeper system views the ability to perceive the world accurately as incompatible with tending the bonfire. A firekeeper who could see everything would understand too much. The eyes of a firekeeper item description says they grant sight to the sightless firekeepers, but this cannot be allowed. Cannot be. The passive construction there is doing enormous work. Someone decided that firekeepers should not see. Whether that someone was Gwyn or the First Flame itself, or some older arrangement that predates both, is one of the questions Dark Souls 3 asks and refuses to answer. The eyes they were never meant to see. The eyes of a firekeeper are the item that unlocks the end of fire ending. The conclusion in which the Ashen One summons the firekeeper after defeating the Soul of Cinder, and together they allow the First Flame to fade without violence. The eyes are found in the darkened Firelink shrine of the untended graves on the dead firekeeper's body. Their description states that they see a world without fire, and that this vision is specifically what firekeepers are blinded to prevent. When you give them to your firekeeper in the living shrine, the music changes. The tone of the bonfire room shifts. She becomes more thoughtful, more present, less focused purely on her function. She begins to speak of what she sees, of a world without fire, of darkness that she insists is not the end. She says, perhaps the curse of the undead is not an end, but a beginning. The question of what she actually sees, whether her vision of a dark world is a vision of death and loss, or genuinely a vision of something new, something like rest, is never answered with certainty. The game wants you to decide whether the end of fire ending is hopeful or devastating. The eyes let the firekeeper tell you what she sees. They do not guarantee she is right. The firekeeper who cannot die. If you kill your firekeeper in Fireling Shrine, the game acknowledges this and allows it. She drops the eyes of a firekeeper if you have given them to her. She drops her set, and then, when you reload the area, she is back. She is standing at the bonfire exactly as she was. She greets you. She does not mention what happened. Her dialogue carries a line that addresses this directly. As a firekeeper, I tend to the flame, and tend to thee. This I do, for thou and for all others. She cannot be killed in any permanent sense. The killing happens, the death happens, and then it is gone. The firekeeper exists outside the cycle of death and resurrection that governs the undead, the hollows, and the lords of cinder. She is not undead in the sense that creates hollowing. She is something else, something bound to the bonfire in a way that makes her continuity a property of the flame rather than of her body. Whether this immortality is a gift or a chain, whether she experiences the deaths between the reloads, or simply ceases for a moment and then continues, is one of the questions the game poses most quietly. She tends the fire tends to her. Neither of them is permitted to stop. The church at World's End, the ringed city, sits at the literal end of everything. It is not a metaphor. The game places it at the farthest edge of the world, a location that exists beyond the normal reach of geography, accessible only by leaping from the top of a crumbling cathedral through a spiraling, fire-lit void, and landing in a desert that looks like the opening cutscene of the entire series, except emptied of everything that once gave it meaning. The city was built by Gwyn for the Pygmies, the descendants of the furtive pygmy who first found the Dark Soul at the dawn of the Age of Fire. It was a gift in the political sense, which in Gwyn's vocabulary means it was a prison with good architecture. The ring knights who inhabit it wear the dark, tar-like shackles of the old gods on their bodies. Armor that was fused to them, the community consensus holds, to contain the power of the Dark Soul running through their blood. The city was designed to keep the power of darkness far from Anil Londo, and under a constant, polite form of divine control. The fact that it is beautiful, genuinely, hauntingly beautiful, with its crumbling towers and dragonfly wing bridges and sky the color of a bruise, makes the nature of what it was built to do all the more interesting. Gwyn was not subtle. He was just thorough. Filianor's broken egg and the time collapse. At the center of the ringed city, past the spears of the church, and through a doorway that the game marks as a point of no return, Filianor sleeps. She is Gwyn's youngest daughter, a woman who was given to the Pygmies as a gift, or a symbol, or a cage keeper, depending on which interpretation of Gwyn's motives you find most honest. She holds a cracked egg in both arms, cradling it with the careful tenderness of someone who has been holding something fragile for longer than it was meant to be held. When you touch the egg, it shatters, and everything changes. The world leaps forward, or the illusion of the present collapses, and the actual present, the true present, resolves around you. The desert you land in is the ringed city as it actually is, ruined, emptied, the end of everything. Filianor's body decays instantly on her bed, centuries catching up to her in a single second. The egg, whatever it was holding time still. Touching it released that hold. The theories about exactly how this mechanism worked, whether the egg contained crystallized abyss mixed with the light of Filianor's divine nature, Whether Gwyn himself froze the city's time before leaving, whether Filianor maintained the stasis through her own sacrifice or simply her proximity to the Dark Soul, are numerous and irreconcilable. What is unambiguous is the result. The moment you touch the egg, you have seen the world as it actually is. Gale's search for the Dark Soul. Slave Knight. Gale is one of the oldest characters you encounter in Dark Souls 3, though you would not know it to look at him. He is ragged, hunched, wrapped in a red hood, and wearing armor that looks as though it has been mended so many times. The original form is merely theoretical. He first appears praying in the Cathedral of the Deep. He calls you an Ashen One. He needs your help to save the world he loves. Specifically, the painted world of Ariandel, where a young painter is locked in a library, waiting to create a new world as soon as she can see the flame. But after the events of the first DLC, Gale has a second mission. The painter needs the Dark Soul as pigment, the blood of the very first humans, the soul that was split between all of pygmy kind and scattered across the history of the world. Gale went looking for it. He travelled to the Ringed City, where the last of the pygmy lords still sat on their thrones. He found them, and he found their blood had dried out, ancient and useless, withered past the point where it could serve as anything. So Gale did the only thing he could think to do. He consumed the pygmy lords. He consumed all of them. He took in every remaining fragment of the Dark Soul until the totality of what was once the furtive pygmy's inheritance was somewhere inside him. And it broke him. By the time you find him at the end of the Ringed City, Gale is no longer entirely coherent. He is enormous, monstrous, powered by the accumulated humanity of an entire lineage of kings. He sees you arrive and attacks because the Dark Soul he carries recognizes something in you. He knew this would happen. His soul's description confirms he understood he was not a champion, that the Dark Soul would likely ruin him, and that he had little hope of a safe return. He went anyway. He got the pigment. It just required him to become it. The pygmies and the Ringed City's purpose. The pygmies are the original humans, or at least the ones closest to the original division of the Dark Soul, the inheritors of the first darkness at the dawn of the world. They are small. They are numerous. They hold fragments of a soul that Gwyn spent his entire existence trying to contain and control. Gwyn built the Ringed City to house them, a place at the edge of the world where human beings with too much Dark Soul in them could be kept comfortable and kept distant. He branded them with the Ring Knight's shackles. He installed Filianor to watch over them. He made the whole arrangement look like a gift so thoroughly that even the pygmy lords, for all their intelligence and long years, continued to pray to his daughter for salvation long after Gwyn himself was ash. The Pygmy King's dialogue, when you find him at the end, is the voice of someone who has only recently, or perhaps always, understood the shape of the cage they were given. He tells you that Filianor's slumber is a deceit. He tells you to wake her if you want the Dark Soul. He has been waiting in the ruin of a city built to imprison him, presiding over a crumbled kingdom for an uncountable number of years. The bitter clarity in his voice, the precision with which he identifies what was done to his people, is one of the most striking moments of character writing in the entire series. Midir's Eternal Vigil, Dark Eater. Midir is the largest dragon in Dark Souls 3, and arguably the most loyally tragic figure in the game. His soul description identifies him plainly. Midir, descendant of archdragons, was raised by the gods, and owing to his immortality, was given a duty to eternally battle the dark, a duty that he would never forget, even after the gods perished. He is a descendant of the original everlasting dragons, not one of the everlasting dragons themselves, but of their lineage, and was taken in and raised by the gods of Anor Londo for a specific purpose, consuming the abyss and preventing it from spreading. His duty was to eat the darkness, to serve as a living vessel for a corruption the gods could not eliminate by any other means. He has been doing this for the entirety of the Age of Fire and beyond. He is still doing it when you encounter him at the base of the Ringed City. The abyss he has swallowed over the millennia is visible in his design. Corruption runs through him in dark veins, and the darkness he exhales is the abyss he has been eating since before any of the current game's events began. His boss soul description confirms the gods placed him here to guard them. Not a choice Midir made, a post assigned to him, an eternal vigil that has outlasted the gods who gave the assignment, outlasted the city he was protecting, outlasted everything except the abyss itself, which keeps arriving. He is still fighting it alone at the bottom of the world, because no one ever came to relieve him. Shira's hidden motivation. Shira, Knight of Filianor, is encountered in the Ringed City as a non-hostile NPC. She guards the access to the inner portions of the city, asking you to leave the princess undisturbed. Her dialogue is careful and formal and contains a specific line that is worth reading closely. As the fire waneth, does she lie by the dark, all for the sake of man. Filianore lies near the Dark Soul. Her proximity to the darkness is, in Shira's framing, an act of sacrifice. Something she does for the benefit of humanity, not for the gods. After you disturb the princess and the time collapse occurs, Shira invades you. She arrives as an enemy with the specific goal of killing you for what you have done. But her invasion dialogue is not the rage of a warrior defending her queen. It is grief. It sounds like someone who understood exactly what would happen when the egg broke, who warned you, who watched you do it anyway. Whether Shira genuinely believed in Filianor's sacrifice as a thing done for humanity's benefit, or whether she understood that the sacrifice was actually Gwyn's imprisonment given a noble framing, and mourned the loss regardless. This distinction is left to the player. She attacks you, she dies, and nothing she did changes anything. The Painter Girl's new world. In the painted world of Arendelle, imprisoned in the library of the Corvian settlement, there is a young painter. She does not have a name in the game. The community sometimes calls her Aria, or the painter. And she is waiting. She is waiting for fire so she can see the color of it clearly enough to paint it. She is waiting for Gale, who has gone to find the pigment she needs. She is waiting, in the most fundamental sense, to begin. Her purpose is to paint a new painted world, a successor to Arendelle, which is rotting, which Sister Frida has been keeping frozen and stagnant to prevent its natural renewal by burning. After you defeat Arendelle and Frida, you give the painter what she needs, the ash of the flame and eventually Gale's blood. She describes the world she wants to paint as cold and gentle and dark, a place that sounds like rest, or like the void between one story and the next. Many in the community have debated whether the painter's new world becomes Bloodborne, or Elden Ring, or some other From Software setting. The game never confirms any of this. What it does confirm is that new painted worlds are possible. That even at the end of everything, in a desert past the edge of time, a child with pigment and a canvas can begin again. Whether that matters, whether it is hope or simply repetition in a new frame, is the question the Ringed City ends on. The serpent statues in Lothric Castle. If you move carefully through the upper reaches of Lothric Castle, past the pus of man and the hollow knights and the petrified dragon in the courtyard, you will find a detail on the walls that stops veterans of the first game cold. The architectural details of Lothric Castle include long-necked, toothy statues, serpentine figures that anyone who played the original Dark Souls will immediately recognize as primordial serpents. Not decorative serpents, not generic gargoyle work. The exact elongated visage of Frampt and Kati, rendered in stone and embedded in the walls of the castle. What are primordial serpent likenesses doing in the stonework of Lothric? The castle is new. It did not exist in the age of Lordran. Someone, at some point, ordered these built. Someone who either venerated the serpents or wanted a record of them, or was signalling affiliation with powers that the general population of Lothric would not have recognized. Sullivan is one candidate. Given what we know of his ambitions and his painted world origins, it would not be out of character for him to have recognized the serpents and their significance. The twin princes, who studied everything in the Grand Archives, are another. What the statues most honestly suggest, based on where they appear and in what volume, is that the primordial serpents have never truly been absent from human history. They have been present in the architecture of kingdoms across the entire Age of Fire, and occasionally someone builds them a monument. Kati's 1,000-year plan. The most patient character in the Dark Souls series never appears directly in Dark Souls 3. Kati, the primordial serpent, who opposed Frampt and urged the original chosen undead to refuse the linking, has been working toward the same goal since before the first game began. Uria's dying confession tells you he is behind Lundor. The usurpation of fire ending, in which a Lord of Hollows seizes the first flame and reshapes it, is his preferred outcome. The Sable Church was built to his specification. The quest line that leads to it involves a man dying willingly to give you his hollow marks, a woman who has killed 100 people for your benefit, a secret wedding in a dead god's tomb, and a pilgrim quietly killing your companion in the dark. All of this is Kati. All of it has been running, version after version, cycle after cycle, since the serpent first crawled up through the New Lundo ruins and offered an undead a deal. What does he actually want from an Age of Dark? What does a primordial serpent do when the fire goes out and hollows sit on every throne? The game will not tell you. Kati is the engine of 3 games worth of catastrophe, and he has never once explained his reasoning to anyone he couldn't directly use. Is Frampt already dead? In Dark Souls 3, Frampt is absent. In the first game, he appeared in Firelink Shrine as a guide. The serpent who told the chosen undead to link the fire, who presented himself as the loyal herald of Lord Gwyn, who offered to eat your excess souls as a service. He was the other side of the serpent coin. Where Katha urged darkness, Frampt urged fire. By the time of Dark Souls 3, he is simply not there. No mention, no appearance, no indication of where he went. The community has long suspected that Frampt is either dead or so thoroughly sidelined by the events of the intervening ages that he no longer matters. If the usurpation of fire ending represents Kati's victory, then Framt's preferred outcome, the perpetuation of the Age of Fire through an endless succession of Lords of Cinder, has failed. He backed the losing side of history. Whether that means death, withdrawal, or simply irrelevance is never addressed. His absence is as complete as any named character's absence in the game. He is not even granted the dignity of a dead body, an item, or a final dialogue. The serpent who urged 1,000 years of fire linking is simply gone, and the game does not stop to acknowledge it. The serpent's true nature, What are the primordial serpents actually? They are enormous. They are ancient. They have heads that seem human in proportion and bodies that are pure serpent. They speak informal, archaic English with an ingratiating warmth that barely conceals enormous patience. In the original game, Frampt described himself as a close friend of Gwyn, a herald of the gods. Carthy presented himself as the voice of the darkness that Gwyn had suppressed. Both of them had agendas that were not fully disclosed. The item lore of the series hints that the primordial serpents may have a relationship to the dragons, that they are either failed dragons, incomplete dragons, or something that emerged from the same mythological substrate as the ancient everlasting dragons, but developed differently. The lore pages of Souls lore suggest the serpents predate the gods, but postdate the dragons, which would make them something like the children of the transition between ages, born in the gap between one world and the next. Whether this means they have always been working toward an outcome that benefits the transition itself, rather than either fire or dark, is a reading the games leave tantalizingly open. They are older than the categories they use. The allegiances they claim have always been, at some level, provisional. How Carthy manipulated every ending. Look at the 3 endings of Dark Souls 3 through the lens of Carthy's preferences and something interesting emerges. Link the fire. The player extends the Age of Fire, which Carthy opposes. But even this ending creates another generation of Unkindled and Lords of Cinder, maintaining the cycle that will eventually produce the conditions for the Age of Dark. End of Fire. The flame fades without intervention, which moves toward darkness but not necessarily toward Carter's specific vision of Hollow's ruling. Usurpation of Fire. The fire is seized and presumably reshaped by a Lord of Hollows, which is Carter's stated desired outcome. Of these 3, only the third is fully Carter's victory. But the first 2 are arguably acceptable to him. The cycle continues, or the flame fades, and either way, the Age of Dark grows closer. The most cynical reading of Carter's patience is that he doesn't particularly care which ending occurs in any given cycle. He is playing across cycles. He just needs enough cycles to eventually produce one, where the right person, in the right hollowed state, with the right 8 dark sigils, makes the right choice at the bonfire, and then he wins. Every other cycle is just the passage of time. The Age of Dark. What it actually means. After all the build-up across 3 games, the Age of Dark remains one of the least specifically described events in the series. We know what it is not. It is not the abyss spreading unchecked. It is not the end of all life. It is not simply the extinction of everything that fire created. The Firekeeper's dialogue in the End of Fire ending is careful to describe a darkness that is not death. She speaks of a darkness in which life and all its glisters might still exist, changed from what they were in the Age of Fire, but present. The Dark Soul, at its most fundamental, is humanity. The Age of Dark, then, is the Age of humanity, a world that belongs to human beings, rather than gods, that runs on the dark potential of what people are, rather than the divine fire that gods used to supplant and control that potential. Gwyn's deepest fear was not darkness in the abstract sense. It was a world in which people, with their fragment of the original Pygmies' inheritance, determined their own terms. The Age of Dark that Carty wants, and that Londor works toward, is, stripped of the sinister framing the series wraps it in. The removal of divine control from human existence. Whether that is liberation or catastrophe, or simply change, is the question the series has been asking, without answering, since its beginning. Uria's last words. When Uria of Londor is killed, whether by a hostile player action or as part of the specific questline interaction that turns her against you, her dying words are for Kate, I have failed thee. Not a prayer, not a farewell, a report to a superior, delivered in the last second available. These words do more work than almost any other line in the game. They confirm Kate's continued existence and relevance at the time of Dark Souls 3's events. They confirm that Uria understood herself as working in service to someone specific, not an abstract ideology. They confirm that failure was a possibility she had considered and apparently dreaded. Not as personal shame exactly, but as a professional accounting. She was given a task. She did not complete it, and the last thing she did was tell the person who gave her the task. The brevity of the line is its most powerful quality. She does not explain. She does not justify. She does not express regret for anything she did in service of the goal. Not the 100 lives, not the manipulation, not the quiet pilgrim in the church of Yorshka. She failed and she reported it, and then she was gone. Sigurd and Yorm's friendship. Yorm the Giant is perhaps the most sympathetic lord of Cinder in the game, a ruler who took on the mantle of lord not for glory or power, but because the profane flame had consumed his city and his people, and he could think of no other way to stop it. Before he left, he gave his closest friend a weapon, the Storm Ruler, an oversized sword with the specific ability to damage giants at scale. He gave it to Sigurd of Katarina with a single instruction. If Yorm ever rose again, Sigurd was to use it to kill him. Not a request, not quite a gift, a burden and a mercy simultaneously, placed in the hands of someone Yorm trusted enough to ask this of. The mystery is what their friendship actually looked like. Yorm was enormous. Sigurd is a medium-sized knight in a round pot helmet. The gulf in physical scale between them mirrors a gulf in everything else. In power, in destiny, in the specific tragedy of being a lord. What brought them close? What do you talk about with someone who is a mountain in human form? The game never fills in the years between the gift and the ruin. It simply gives you the weapon and the obligation, and lets you understand that these two were close enough for Yorm to make the request, and for Sigurd to spend the entire length of the game trying to honor it. Vort's ring and his transformation. Fort of the Boreal Valley is among the first bosses you face. A massive armored figure on all fours, moving with the aggressive animality of something that has mostly forgotten it was ever a person. He guards the entrance to Lothric, breathes frost, and attacks with a feral intensity that seems disproportionate to a gatekeeper. But Vort was one of the outrider knights of Pontiff Sulivan, a soldier dispatched to Lothric with the ring that would eventually destroy him. The Pontiff's left eye ring, which Vort drops upon death, is described as bewitching the wearer into frenzied combat, luring them toward battles of death. Vort was sent here wearing that ring. He was sent to ensure nothing escaped Lothric during the corruption of the Puce of Man, a mission that required exactly the kind of relentless, unthinking violence the ring eventually made him capable of. He was a knight with enough standing to be dispatched on a critical assignment. He is now a dog. The ring did exactly what it was designed to do. Whether Vort, in whatever portion of him still persisted beneath the madness, recognized the shape of what had happened to him, is one of the questions the first area of the game poses and then walks past without answering. The Crystal Sage twins. The Crystal Sages you encounter in Dark Souls 3 are described as carrying on the tradition of Big Hat Logan, the sorcerer from the original Dark Souls whose obsessive pursuit of Seath The Scaleless's secrets eventually drove him mad in the Duke's archives. The Crystal Sages did not study directly under Logan, but their crystal sorcery descends through the lineage of his research, passed down through generations until it reached them. They brought that tradition to Lothric, establishing themselves in the Road of Sacrifices, where one sage appears, and the Grand Archives. But there are two of them, and the way they appear in the game is strange. The Crystal Sage in the Road of Sacrifices teleports when damaged, creating phantom copies to confuse the player. The Grand Archives version is weaker, appearing as a diminished echo of the Road of Sacrifices encounter. The mystery involves the nature of the twins' relationship and what crystal sorcery costs at its deepest levels. Logan was consumed by his pursuit of Seath's secrets. The Crystal Sages, who carried that tradition further, appear pale and visually diminished, degraded, it seems, by whatever sustaining the mastery of crystal magic requires over time. What did they sacrifice to reach that level? And what is the relationship between the two, which encountered you in the swamp and which stands exhausted in the archives? The game presents them both without explanation, as though their twinhood is simply a fact requiring no commentary. Wolnir's silver bracelets. High Lord Wolnir is the ruler of Karthus, or was before the Abyss claimed him. He is encountered at the bottom of a chalice in the catacombs of Karthus, a skeletal figure of truly enormous proportions, so large that the fight takes place against his buried upper body rising from the dark. He is the Abyss in a sense, fully consumed by it, his body more darkness than substance. But on his wrists, he wears 3 bracelets that glow against the surrounding corruption. The exact story of those bracelets is told in the description of Wolnir's holy sword. When Wolnir fell to the Abyss and was gripped by a fear of true darkness, he pleaded to the gods for the first time. What he had to hold on to were a holy sword and 3 armlets stripped from the corpses of clerics, priests he had killed during his conquest of kingdoms. These were not gifts the gods sent him. They were relics from the priests he had slaughtered, looted trophies of his own tyranny that he now clung to in desperation. Whatever holy power they retained from their original owners was the only thing standing between Wolnir and full dissolution into the Abyss. When you destroy them in the boss fight, you break that thin lifeline, and the darkness finishes what it started. He screams as each one breaks. The mystery in this encounter is less about the mechanics than about the shape of the irony. A conqueror who built his throne on the deaths of holy men, kept alive at the end by the residual grace of the very people he killed. Greirat's final journey. Greirat of the Undead Settlement is a thief with an unmistakably kind soul, found in a cell below the high wall of Lothric, and willing to serve Firelink Shrine in exchange for his freedom. He has a specific and quietly heartbreaking quest. He ventures out periodically to pillage items for the shrine's shop, and whether he returns from those ventures depends on whether you have provided him with protection or guidance. Send him to the Undead Settlement without assistance and he may survive. Send him to Irithyll without either Sigurd or Patch's intervention, and he almost certainly will not. Send him to Lothric Castle, and he will not come back no matter what you do. What makes this mystery so persistent is the simplicity and specificity of his loyalty. He is a thief who decided to be useful. He asks for almost nothing. He brings back things that help you at risk to himself, because he has decided that helping is what he does now. The third journey, to Lothric Castle, sends him into a place teeming with puss of man corruption and hollow knights, while you are presumably somewhere below fighting the twin princes. His ashes are found at the foot of the Grand Archives. He made it to the door. He died there, in the cold, having gathered what he could and gotten as far as the stone steps of a building full of scholars who had already hollowed. Whatever he was thinking in those last minutes, whether he was afraid, whether he had regrets, the game does not say. Patches the eternal schemer. Patches appears in every From Software game. He has appeared in Demon Souls, every Dark Souls, Bloodborne, Elden Ring. He's always a bald man with a single blue eye. He's always a rogue, always scheming, always managing to be on approximately the wrong side of every situation, while remaining charming enough to escape the consequences. In Dark Souls 3, he locks you in a tower and offers to sell you a ladder back down. His questline is the same questline it has always been. The mystery of Patches is not what he does. That's consistent across thousands of years of in-universe history. But what he is, he cannot be the same person. The timescale between Demon Souls and Dark Souls 3 is enormous. Even if you allow for the undead curse and its property of preventing death through ordinary means, Patches operates in every age with the same personality, the same face, the same business model. There is either a lineage of Patches, a tradition, a name passed down, a role that gets refilled, or there is something genuinely strange about this one man's continuity across the ages. The game neither confirms nor denies any explanation. Patches just keeps existing, keeps selling ladders, keeps trapping clerics, keeps surviving everything with a grin. Irina's choice, faith or darkness. Irina of Karim begins her questline blind and gentle, found in a cell in the undead settlement, aspiring to become a firekeeper. She has a natural affinity for miracle magic and will purchase miracle tomes from you and teach their contents. The fork in her path is elegant in its cruelty. If you give her only approved non-dark tomes, she eventually realizes her dream and becomes a true firekeeper, ascending to the tower above Firelink. If you give her forbidden tomes, the Londor Braille Divine Tome or the Deep Braille Divine Tome, she begins to be consumed by the darkness within the miracles, and her guardian Igon, who is enormous and devoted to her with a ferocity that is clearly more than professional, takes her away in a rescue that she does not ask for. The tomes themselves are not evil objects. They are knowledge. What makes them forbidden is the specific darkness they contain. The miracles of deep and hollow that represent, in Irina's hands, the precise thing a firekeeper was blinded to be spared from. She wants to see everything. She is being trained, through the game's systems, in whether to let her see it. The answer depends entirely on you. The painter in the attic. The nameless painter is locked in the library of the Corvian settlement in the painted world of Ariandel. The Corvians, human crow hybrids who worship her as their lady, have imprisoned her to prevent her from painting a new world, because a new world would require burning the old one. And Sister Frida has convinced the settlement to choose rot over renewal. The painter waits. She is young. She speaks with remarkable calm about her purpose and her Uncle Gale, and her plans for the world she will create when she has the right materials. She calls the world she intends to paint cold, dark and gentle. A place that sounds less like the aftermath of an apocalypse and more like a place specifically designed for rest. Whether she is human, half-dragon, a painting herself, or something else entirely, is never confirmed. Her possible parentage, some argue she emerged from Filianora's egg, would make her the child of the end of the world in the most literal possible sense. What the game confirms is simpler and stranger. In the worst room, in the worst version of a world that is dying, a child is quietly waiting to make something new and better. and she needs fire and darkness together to do it. Why worlds are collapsing together. The opening narration of Dark Souls 3 describes the linking of the first flame drawing all kingdoms together, compressing their geographies into proximity. This is why you can walk from Farron Keep to the catacombs of Carthus without a sense that you have crossed a continent. The ringed city sits at the edge of time, and yet you can reach it from a cathedral in Lothric by falling through a hole in reality. This collapse of geographies is not arbitrary. It is the stated cosmological consequence of the Age of Fire entering its terminal phase. As the flame weakens, the worlds it once sustained and separated begin to drift together, like the last embers of different fires combining in the same grate. The Grand Archives contain texts from every kingdom. The undead settlement exists somewhere in what may once have been Lothric's domains, or may be a separate nation entirely, now folded adjacent. The Dreg Heap, the transitional area leading to the Ring City, is literally a pile of debris from multiple worlds and multiple ages. Architecture from Earthen Peak, building materials from across the series, all stacked in the pile that forms when the frame of reality starts losing its structure. The collapsing world is not a narrative convenience. It is the state of the world. The Grand Archives and Logan's Crystal Legacy. The Grand Archives of Lothric Castle is one of the most visually distinctive locations in the game. A vast library of wax and books where scholars dip their heads in wax to protect against the maddening knowledge that the tomes contained. It is also, as established through the Crystal Sages and the presence of crystal golems throughout, a repository of Big Hat Logan's lineage of crystal sorcery. Logan sought the eternal nature of Seath the Scaleless, the dragon who went mad in his quest to create something that would last forever. The crystal golems, the crystal weapons, the crystal sorceries developed through the sages and brought to Lothric. All of it follows the thread of a man who wanted to understand what it meant to be immortal, and found something worse than death at the end of that question. The scholars in the Grand Archives who dipped their heads in wax were not protecting themselves from ordinary knowledge. They were protecting themselves from the specific madness that Logan's work encoded, the kind of knowing that hollows you not through lack of purpose, but through too much of it, pointed in the wrong direction. Archdragon Peak and the Path of the Dragon. Archdragon Peak is the highest point in the game and one of the most isolated, reachable only by performing the Path of the Dragon gesture in front of the correct altar, which itself is accessible only through a hidden drop from the Consume King's garden. It is a place of wind and stone, an ancient, patient draconic presence. The wyverns who move through it are not hostile unless provoked. The stone dragons who crouch at its edges are motionless but not dead. The ancient wyvern who blocks the primary path forward is a genuine obstacle. But the presence of the Nameless King suggests that at least one being travels this peak without killing or being killed by its inhabitants. The mystery of Archdragon Peak involves its function. It is not a kingdom. It is not a ruin. It is more like a place where the idea of dragonhood persists, maintained by practitioners of the path of the Dragon Covenant who seek to transcend their humanity by becoming more like the everlasting creatures that predated fire. That this practice continues, that people still come to this peak to prostrate themselves and aspire towards scales and stone, is remarkable, given that the Age of Fire is explicitly ending all around them. Some truths are older than the current age, and will be true again after it ends. Irithal's Boreal Valley. A city outside time. Irithal is frozen, literally, in that frost coats its streets, and the Silver Knights who patrol it move through perpetual cold. but the sense of Irithel being outside time goes further than temperature. It was built as a monument to what Anna Londo once was, a city of gods relocated to a far northern valley, maintained by Gwyndolin and then by Sullivan, and then by Aldrich in succession. The pontiff's left eye describes Irithel as a place where knights peer into the black orb, a city maintained through acts of devotion and coercion simultaneously. Everyone in Irithel is in service to something, enforced by Sullivan's rings, or by the deep devotion of the Silver Knights to their dead masters. There is no civilian population visible in Irithel. There are guards, there are hollows in the sewer, there are dogs with human skulls. The city is a facade maintained at enormous cost, preserved not because the life within it is worth preserving, but because the appearance of the city is a symbol that someone decided was too important to let decay. Gwyndolin maintained it because the gods of Anor Londo required a home. Sullivan maintained it because controlling the home of the gods gave him authority. Neither of them maintained it for the people who might have lived there. The profaned capital's disaster. The profane capital sits above the Irithel dungeon and below the level of Irithel streets, a ruined city that was consumed by a flame that the game describes as having been born of the sky. The profane flame is unusual in the cosmology of Dark Souls. It did not emerge from the first flame. It was not kindled by any Lord of Cinder. It simply fell from somewhere and burned. It burns human flesh specifically, which distinguishes it from ordinary fire. It consumed the profaned capital and everyone in it. Yorm became a Lord of Cinder specifically to stop it. His sacrifice was not to protect the world abstractly, but to extinguish a specific fire that had destroyed his specific city and his specific people. The mystery of the profane flame's origin is one of the cleanest unanswered questions in the game. Born of the sky could mean divine retribution, could mean something from outside the known cosmological framework of fire and dark, could mean literally that it fell from an astronomical object. Sullivan, who was drawn to the profane capital precisely because of the flame's unusual properties, understood it as a source of power rather than punishment. The community has never resolved whether it was both. The smouldering lake's origins, beneath the catacombs of Carthus, beneath the bones and the skeleton ball, and the old Carthus pyromancy traditions, there is a lake on fire. The smouldering lake glows with the heat of what is described as a demon civilization's last ember. The old demon king holds court here, surrounded by the remnants of demon kind, all of them fading, all of them smaller and weaker than the demons of the first game, burning with the last of a fire that was already dying. The smouldering lake and the demon ruins accessible from it occupy the same geographic space as the demon ruins and lost Izalith from the first Dark Souls. The place where the Witch of Izalith attempted to recreate the first flame and created the bed of chaos and the original demonic corruption. The demons of Dark Souls 3 are the descendants of that catastrophe, generations removed, still burning with fire that no longer knows why it is burning. The old demon king is the last. He is not terrifying. He is old and enormous and clearly dying, and his fire sputters between attacks in a way that reads less as menace and more as exhaustion. When you kill him, it is not a heroic act in any uncomplicated sense. It is mercy for a thing that was born of a disaster and has been trying to maintain itself ever since. Why Lothric Castle floats near the sky. The high wall of Lothric rises above a void. Lothric Castle hangs at the top of that wall like something that has been slowly ascending for an age. The geography is deliberately irrational. There is no base, no foundation visible beneath the lowest levels of Lothric's architecture, no connection to ordinary ground. This is explicitly a consequence of the world collapse described in the opening narration. The kingdoms of the world are converging, folding together, and Lothric, the kingdom built specifically as the endpoint of the undead pilgrimage, the place where the princes were supposed to link the fire, is at the top of the collapse. It is the highest point of the pile. The irony of this is precise. Lothric was supposed to be the resolution of the current cycle. The prince would link the flame, and the Age of Fire would continue. Instead, the prince refused, and now Lothric Castle hangs above an abyss, slowly drifting towards some final convergence it was never meant to reach. The castle, floating in the sky, is a building whose purpose has been denied, still holding itself up out of architectural habit, waiting for a conclusion that has already been indefinitely postponed. What being unkindled means. The Ashen One is not undead in the ordinary sense. They are unkindled, a specific category that the game's opening narration defines carefully. Those who attempted to link the first flame and were burned to ash by it instead. They were not strong enough. They failed the sacrifice. They were buried in the cemetery of ash, the graveyard attached to a shrine that itself exists in a kind of liminal space. And they waited there, in ash, for a moment when their failure might still be useful. Being unkindled is thus a particular form of inadequacy held in suspension. You are not powerful enough to be a Lord of Cinder. You are not pathetic enough to be an ordinary hollow. You are the thing that tried and was consumed without completing the act, the person who put their hand into the fire and found it was not enough, and then ceased to matter for an indeterminate period of time, until the age got desperate enough to reconsider. This is the protagonist's starting condition. Ash, failure, a cemetery, and a coiled sword in their chest. Everything that follows in the game is built on that foundation. The Ashen One's missing past. Unlike the chosen undead of the first game, who has a specific starting location and implied history, the Ashen One has no backstory. You choose a class: Knight, Pyromancer, Mercenary. And each class has a brief description of who this person was before they became Ash. But these descriptions are gestures, not histories. The Knight is a hard-won knight, famished of soul, and fled from the ancient land. The Pyromancer worked in their craft since birth and would like to link the fire, for they do not wish to see it fade. Each background is a sentence or two, enough to suggest the outline of a person without establishing any of its content. We do not know what the Ashen One did when they were alive. We do not know what world they came from, which kingdom burned them, whether they volunteered or were compelled. We do not know if they remember any of it. The Firekeeper speaks to them as though they are present for the first time. No history, no context, only the moment of arrival and the task that follows. The mystery of the Ashen One's past is deliberately and completely unsolvable, because the game was designed to put you in that position rather than observe someone else in it. Ludlith's sacrifice before the game begins. Ludlith of Courland is the only Lord of Cinder who chose his throne. He confirms this himself in direct dialogue. I took the mantle of Lord of Cinder of mine own volition. I speak these words with pride. The other lords were dragged back from their graves against their will. Ludlith returned willingly. Before he was ever a lord, he was a scholar of soul transposition, a forbidden art he practiced in Courland, one that he says left a foul stain upon Courland's honour. He was exiled for it. His throne in Firelink is engraved simply, Ludlith the Exiled. The linking consumed his legs, His body is burned away from the knees down, a detail he circles around rather than states plainly. And when he dies and revives in his sleep, he mutters about burning to the bone. His willingness distinguishes him from the other lords, but what exactly he knew at the time of his return, whether he understood that the current cycle would produce an ashen one, whether his decision to remain on the throne was simple loyalty or something more calculated. The game never clarifies. What can be read between his words is that he knew the eyes of the Firekeeper were dangerous and worked to keep them hidden from the current keeper. Whether that makes him a quiet architect of mercy, or simply a man who made one decision, whose weight he has been carrying ever since, is the question his dialogue keeps circling without ever quite answering. Andre, the undying blacksmith. Andre of Astora is a blacksmith. In the original Dark Souls, he worked in the undead parish, below the Bell of Awakening, forging weapons for whoever needed them. In Dark Souls 3, he is in Firelink Shrine, doing the same thing, apparently having not aged significantly across the gap between games. This is remarkable. Andre is not a Lord of Cinder. He has not linked the First Flame. He is not hollow, as far as visible evidence suggests. He is simply a blacksmith who has been doing his job for an incomprehensibly long time. Long enough that the entire span of the Dark Souls trilogy, the events of 3 games and their DLCs, the fall and rebuilding of kingdoms, the repeated linking and fading of the First Flame, has passed while he has been at the same forge with the same hammer. Whether his longevity is a consequence of his specific relationship to the undead curse, of some quality unique to him, or of something else entirely, is never addressed. He is just there. He fixes things. The world ends and begins and ends again, and Andre is still hammering at something, and perhaps that is what the game thinks continuity looks like. The bell that never rings. In the Firelink Shrine of Dark Souls 3, there is a bell above the main structure. It does not ring. In the first Dark Souls, ringing the bells of awakening was the central quest of the first half of the game. A ritual that called the undead to their purpose, that announced to whatever powers organized the cycle that a champion was making their attempt. In Dark Souls 3, the bell exists but serves no mechanical function. It is there. It is a bell. It does not ring. The community has noted this silence as deliberate. The current age is the age in which the cycle has broken down, in which lords of Cinder have abandoned their thrones, in which the machinery of fire and fate is grinding instead of turning smoothly. A bell that does not ring in a shrine that is meant to receive champions is the architectural expression of everything that has gone wrong. The bell was built for a purpose. The purpose has been suspended. The bell waits, as everything in Dark Souls 3 waits, for a resolution that may or may not honor the intention of the thing that was built. The link the fire ending. Hollow victory. When you link the First Flame, the world goes white. You dissolve into the fire, becoming another cinder, another lord added to the accumulated sacrifice that has been sustaining the Age of Fire since Gwyn first walked into the kiln. The fire blazes up. The age continues. You are gone. This is framed as the heroic ending, the correct ending, the one that the game's opening makes sound inevitable and noble. But Lothric refused it. Ludleth did it once and appears to be consumed with regret. The framing around this ending in the Dark Souls 3 is considerably more ambivalent than the same ending in the first game. By now, you have seen enough cycles to understand that linking the fire does not end suffering, does not heal the world, does not deliver on the implicit promise of the ritual. It simply continues. The fire burns a little longer. The unkindled are buried in the cemetery of ash and wait. The lords of cinder sit on their thrones and eventually rise from their graves when the cycle needs them again. You become part of a process that you now know, from everything you have seen, has no terminus other than the one that produces a dark, empty shrine at the end of time. The end of fire, darkness without death. The end of fire ending requires the eyes of the firekeeper, the eyes that show a world without fire, and a willingness to summon the firekeeper rather than interact with the bonfire alone. When you do, she kneels before the dying first flame. She extinguishes it, not dramatically, not with violence. She simply puts it out, the way you put out a candle, gently, with care. And what follows is not a catastrophe. It is darkness, soft, present, quiet. The firekeeper speaks of darkness not as an end, but as something that contains life in a different form. She cries, a small flame flickers in her hands, and you can choose to take it back. If you do, she stops crying, thanks you softly, and the screen fades. If you leave it to die, she looks into the darkness with the eyes she was never supposed to have, and the screen goes out without violence. The mystery of this ending is whether she is right, whether the darkness ahead is genuinely something new and livable, or whether it is the long dark that Gwyn feared and spent his existence preventing. The game will not resolve it. The firekeeper believes what she sees in the eyes. You have to decide whether to trust her. The usurpation of fire, king of nothing. The usurpation of fire ends with the Ashen One seizing the flame. The darkness spreads outward. The hollows gather, and the screen shows you on a throne surrounded by small, hollow figures. Not subjects, exactly. Not citizens. Not a court. Just hollows, surrounding the new Lord of Hollows in the dark. Yuria is there, if she survived. She kneels. It is the most ambitious ending and the most ambiguous one. The Lord of Hollows is not crowned with fire or dark, but with the accumulated humanity that leaked out through every dark sigil. The sum of everything that was lost through each death that made you hollow. You rule an age built on the empty space left by what people gave up to become this version of the undead. Whether the world this throne sits in is one worth having, whether the hollows gathered around you are there by choice or by the same compulsion that drove them to fill every other space in the game, whether Kathy's long game ends in anything resembling what he claimed to want. None of this is addressed. The screen fades. The King of Nothing sits in the dark, and the Age of Dark, whatever it is, begins. The Soul of Cinder, every champion at once. The final boss of Dark Souls 3 is not a person. It is a memory. The Soul of Cinder is the accumulated soul of every being who has ever linked the first flame. Every Lord of Cinder, every champion of Ash, every person who made the walk into the kiln and became cinder. It wears the armor of all of them simultaneously. In its first phase, it cycles through fighting styles, straight sword, pyromancy, sorcery, miracles, not because it is showing off, but because it contains the memories of every person who used these methods and linked the fire. It is the archive of every cycle, fighting you with the sum of everything that came before. In its second phase, it shifts to Gwyn's moveset, because Gwyn was the first. Because when the amalgamation of all Lords of Cinder reaches the deepest layer of itself, what it finds there is the one who started the whole thing. A man so frightened of the dark that he walked into a fire, and whose fear has been the engine of every cycle since. The Soul of Cinder playing Gwyn's theme in its second phase is not a nostalgic callback. It is the revelation that the current age has always been about one king's terror, replicated across the ages, burning everyone who tried to fix what that terror created. the soul of Cinder. Every champion at once. The final boss of Dark Souls. 3 is not a person. It is a memory. The soul of Cinder is the accumulated soul of every being who has ever linked the first flame. Every Lord of Cinder, every champion of Ash, every person who made the walk into the kiln and became Cinder. It wears the armor of all of them simultaneously. In its first phase, it cycles through fighting styles, straight sword, pyromancy, sorcery, miracles, not because it is showing off, but because it contains the memories of every person who used these methods and linked the fire. It is the archive of every cycle, fighting you with the sum of everything that came before. In its second phase, it shifts to Gwyn's moveset, because Gwyn was the first, because when the amalgamation of all Lords of Cinder reaches the deepest layer of itself, what it finds there is the one who started the whole thing. A man so frightened of the dark that he walked into a fire, and whose fear has been the engine of every cycle since. The soul of Cinder playing Gwyn's theme in its second phase is not a nostalgic callback. It is the revelation that the current age has always been about one king's terror, replicated across the ages, burning everyone who tried to fix what that terror created. Is linking the fire evil? This question runs beneath the entire game without ever being posed directly. Lothric studied and refused. The Firekeeper sees a world without fire and cries with something that sounds like relief. Kati has been arguing against the linking since the first game, and his arguments are never definitively refuted. The cycle of linking the fire has produced the Dark Sign, which enslaves all undead to a curse they did not choose, the Undead Settlement and its managed despair, Erithil and its frozen residents, the Undead Asylum, the Undead Burg, every place in every game where people are managed and discarded by the machinery of firekeeping. The Lords of Cinder who were powerful enough to make the sacrifice and are resurrected from their graves when the next cycle needs them, no matter what they might prefer. What linking the fire produces is more Age of Fire. And the Age of Fire is, from the inside, a world where humans exist as a problem to be managed rather than a people to be free. The game does not conclude that linking is evil. It makes sure you understand what it costs before you choose. The flame that refuses to die. At the most fundamental level of Dark Souls cosmology, there is a question about whether the first flame is a natural thing or not. Natural fires die. They consume their fuel and go out. The first flame, as established across 3 games, requires periodic sacrifice to continue. It does not sustain itself. It burns through the people who link it, and when they are consumed, it begins to fade until the next champion arrives. This means the flame in its current form is not fire as physics describes it. It is something else, something that needs to eat, something that will not go out on its own terms, but also cannot maintain itself without external input. The debate about what the first flame actually is, whether it was always this way, whether something went wrong at a foundational level in the original Age of Fire, whether Gwyn's fear altered its nature when he first walked into it, is one that the game's lore gestures toward without resolving. What the game seems to establish through 3 titles and all their DLC is that the flame cannot simply die because someone keeps feeding it. The question of whether to keep feeding it is, in the end, a question about whether the Age of Fire's costs have ever been worth its benefits. Sister Frieda's identity. Sister Frieda presents herself in the painted world of Ariandel as a penitent, someone who came to the painted world seeking peace, who found a people she wanted to protect, who chose the gentle rot of a dying world over the violence of renewal. She is beautiful and cold and deeply convincing. She is also one of the founders of the Sable Church of Lundor, one of the 3 sisters who built the institution that pursues the Age of Dark on Carter's behalf. She abandoned that project. Yuria, her sister, describes her as having given Londor the slip, an act that reads as a deliberate escape from a shared obligation. What drove Frida from Londor? The game does not say. What made her choose the Painted World specifically, a place of rot and stasis that operates as the philosophical opposite of Londor's agenda of hollowed kingship? Her own dialogue suggests she is drawn to preservation. She convinced Ariandel to suppress the flame rather than use it to renew the world, choosing the known pain of prolonged decay over the unknown outcome of burning and beginning again. Perhaps Londor's project asked her to build something new. Perhaps she discovered, at the core of herself, that she only knew how to preserve. The woman who once helped design a plan for a hollow kingdom now keeps a frozen world from renewing itself and calls it home. The Painted World's purpose. Painted worlds are refuges for things that cannot exist in the main world. Ariamis in the original Dark Souls was created for crossbreed Priscilla, too strange for the gods to accept, and too gentle for them to destroy outright. Ariandel in Dark Souls 3 is deteriorating, rotting from some internal decay that Sister Frida has chosen to preserve through suppression rather than cure. The purpose of a painted world is to contain, to take something that disrupts the main world's categories and give it a place that exists adjacent to but separate from the primary reality. The painter's task, to create a new painted world, continues this tradition, but with a difference. She intends to paint a world with the dark soul, which means the new painted world will contain the fundamental nature of humanity, rather than a creature that humanity cannot classify. A world made of human darkness, created by a painter at the end of time, using the blood of the last human king as pigment. Whether this is the most hopeful thing in Dark Souls 3 or the most melancholy is a matter of interpretation. It is certainly the most complete response to everything the series has been building toward. Who painted Ariandel? Father Ariandel is the great Corvian charged with maintaining the flame that would renew the painted world when it began to rot. He is enormous, pitiful, half consumed by the task he was given. He bleeds into a bowl, his own blood, apparently the fuel required to keep the painting's internal logic intact. The painted world of Ariandel is named after him, which suggests he was either its creator or its founding steward. But the actual painting of a painted world requires paint, a canvas, and a painter. The community has speculated about whether Ariandel painted his own world, whether he was the instrument of some earlier painter's vision, whether the world existed before him and acquired his name through association. The game describes him only in terms of his current role, the keeper of the flame, broken by guilt and Frida's influence into suppressing the very fire he was meant to wield. Who he was before the rot started, before Frida arrived, before his purpose became the horror of restraining renewal. This history exists entirely in the gap before the DLC begins. Corvian Settlement's tragedy. The Corvians, people who are half crow, with feathered bodies and beaked faces and hands that end in black wings, were the original inhabitants of the painted world. Their tradition required them to burn their home when it began to rot, a painful, necessary renewal, a death that produced resurrection. They were, in the most literal sense, built for the cycle. And then Sister Frida arrived and convinced them otherwise. She told them the rot was livable. She convinced Ariandel to bleed into the bowl rather than light the fire. She took the Corvian Knights, the warriors who were supposed to protect the Lady Painter and the tradition of renewal, and redirected their devotion toward herself. Now the settlement is divided. The Corvians who still believe in the old way are killed by the knights who serve Frida. The Lady Painter is imprisoned. The settlement rots around everyone in it, the buildings crumbling, the sky the color of snow on ash. The tragedy of the Corvian settlement is that it was a community that had a sustainable relationship with its own mortality, a culture of necessary burning and necessary beginning, and it was talked out of that relationship by someone who chose comfort over continuation. The rot is not metaphor. It is the physical manifestation of what happens when a community stops being willing to let things die. The Millwood Knights and their forgotten war. In the painted world of Ariandel, before the descent into the settlement proper, there is a forest populated by the Millwood Knights, enormous armored warriors whose equipment descriptions reference a kingdom called Millwood and a war fought so long ago that no record of its purpose survives. They came to the painted world after losing their kingdom, apparently, and they have been here ever since. The Millwood Greatbow, their signature weapon, carries descriptions suggesting they were renowned archers who fought in battles that ended long before the events of any game in the series. They exist in the painted world as refugees, things that were discarded from the main world, taking shelter in a place designed for the discarded. What was Millwood? What did they lose? What war was so complete in its destruction that an entire order of legendary archers found themselves with nowhere to go but a painting? The answer is not in the game. The Millwood Knights are one of the cleanest demonstrations of how Dark Souls handles history. Not with explanation, but with presence. Not with records, but with survivors who can no longer tell you what they survived. Midir's connection to Gwyn. Dark Eater Midir was not simply assigned to the Ringed City by accident. His soul description confirms that he was raised by the gods, specifically to serve as a guardian against the abyss, raised, not enlisted or hired. As a descendant of the archdragons, he carries genuine draconic lineage, but he was brought up within the world that the gods created rather than being one of the original everlasting dragons the gods went to war against. The old moonlight spell transposed from his soul is described as a memory from not long after the beginning, which implies his lineage may predate certain aspects of the current age, but the soul description clearly identifies him as a descendant, not an original. This raises the interesting question of what the arrangement between Midir and the gods actually looked like. The gods and dragons were enemies by design. The Age of Fire was built on the defeat of the everlasting dragons. And yet here is a dragon of archdragon descent, raised within the gods' own world, assigned the task of consuming the darkness they were afraid of. Whether Midir thought of this as loyalty, service, or simply the only existence he had ever known, the game offers no inner voice for him. He is enormous. He has been eating the abyss for so long that the abyss is visible in his body, and he is still there. Lapse memory loss. In the Ringed City DLC, before the final descent, you encounter a man in armor who has completely forgotten who he is. He calls himself Lap, a nickname he invented for himself because he has nothing else. And he is searching for the Purging Monument, a structure that will restore his memories. He is friendly, he's curious, he helps you when you let him. And if you guide him toward his goal, he eventually finds the monument, his memories return, and he reveals himself to be Patches. The same Patches who sold you things in Firelink Shrine, the same Patches who locked you in a tower, His response to remembering is immediate and completely consistent with his character. He thanks you, takes the treasure nearby, leaves a note explaining that he has relieved you of the treasure, and is gone. The mystery of Lap's memory loss is whether it was voluntary. Patches, who has survived everything by staying just on the right side of inconvenient situations, arriving at the end of the world with no memories and a friendlier demeanor than usual. This could be amnesia from whatever got him this far. Or it could be a very deliberate performance from a man who knew that a stranger with no memories is easier to help than a man with Patches' specific reputation. The game never resolves it. The Dark Soul itself, what is it? The Dark Soul is the foundation of humanity in the Dark Souls universe. At the dawn of the Age of Fire, alongside the discovery of the Lord Souls by Gwyn, Nito, the Witch of Izalith, and the undisclosed Pygmy, the furtive Pygmy, barely mentioned in the game's opening, a fifth soul was found, the Dark Soul. The Pygmy who found it did not wield it as a weapon or use it to found a kingdom. Instead, the soul was divided, split into countless fragments and distributed, and from those fragments came human beings. Every person in the Dark Souls universe contains a piece of the original Dark Soul. This is what the Dark Sigil represents when it leaks, the darkness of humanity seeping out. This is what the Abyss is when it overflows, the accumulated darkness of many people's fragments, unconstrained. Gale's final form contains all of those fragments, drawn back together after a lifetime of consuming the Pygmy Lords. What the Dark Soul actually is at the level of cosmological origin, whether it is darkness as a fundamental force, whether it is the inverse of the Lord Souls in a philosophical sense, whether the furtive Pygmy was the first human or something older, the game approaches but never completes. The Dark Soul is the most important thing in the series and the least explained. Mankind's true nature in the Souls world. Human beings in Dark Souls occupy a specific and consistently undersold position in the cosmological hierarchy. They are the inheritors of the Dark Soul. They have within them a darkness that the gods built the entire Age of Fire to suppress and manage. They hollow without purpose. They fill the abyss when their darkness overflows. They are, in the framing of the divine world, a problem to be managed through the dark sign and the undead curse. But they are also the only beings in the series who can link the first flame, not gods. Gods like Gwyn had to take power from the flame to do it. Humans walk into the fire as they are, with their curse intact, and they burn and become lords. The original argument of Kate, that the Age of Dark is the age of humanity, that the darkness in people is their inheritance rather than their disease, is never directly refuted by the game's narrative. What the game keeps showing is that the management of human darkness costs more than it produces, that the institutions built to contain it become corrupted, and that the darkness itself, when given a painter and a canvas and a small amount of pigment, makes a world that sounds cold and gentle and new. The first sin, was there one in Dark Souls 3? The concept of a first sin, the idea that the Age of Fire began with a transgression that set everything that followed in motion, was explored most explicitly in Dark Souls 2, where Aldia named it specifically. In Dark Souls 3, the concept is present without being named. Gwyn's fear drove him to link the flame, which created the dark sign, which created the undead curse, which created every institution in the game designed to manage that curse. If there is a first sin in Dark Souls 3, it is probably Gwyn's choice to perpetuate the Age of Fire rather than allow the natural transition to whatever came after it. But some readings push it back further. the discovery of the Lord Souls, and the division of the world into fire and dark in the first place. The arrangement that required some things to burn so others could exist. The fundamental structure of a cosmos in which continuation requires sacrifice. The first sin in this reading is not Gwyn's cowardice. It is the fact that the Age of Fire was built on a foundation that required human beings to suffer for it. And no one sinned in that arrangement so much as the world structure itself. Why the cycle keeps repeating? The cycle of fire and dark has now repeated enough times that no one in Dark Souls 3 seems surprised by it. The shrine handmaid sells you things with the resigned competence of someone who has done this before. The firekeeper knows the words for every occasion. The primordial serpents have been running variations on the same agenda across multiple cycles without apparent frustration at its duration. The cycle persists because the first flame requires it, because the flame is structured to need linking, and because the dark sign ensures that people keep being created who are capable of the linking and driven toward it. But it also persists because of a more specific human quality, the inability or unwillingness to let things end. Every person who walks into the kiln and becomes a Lord of Cinder is someone who chose the continuation of what was over the unknown quality of what comes after. Gwyn was the first. The Soul of Cinder is the accumulation of all of them. And at the heart of that accumulation is the same choice. Made over and over, the fire is familiar, the dark is unknown, and so the fire continues. What happens? After the Age of Dark, if the Age of Dark arrives, truly arrives, not as the abyss flooding of a single city, but as the cosmological transition that replaces the Age of Fire, the game declines to show you what follows. The End of Fire ending goes to black. The Usurpation of Fire ending shows a throne in darkness. Neither ending includes a morning. This is consistent across the series. The games have always been stories about the transition, not about what comes after. What the lore suggests is that the Age of Dark would be characterized by human beings operating without the divine management of the dark sign and the undead curse. People who are, for the first time in the history of this world, simply alive without a curse attached to that state. Whether the darkness produces art, civilization, suffering, peace, or something the game has no vocabulary for. This is what the series keeps deferring. The Painter's New World is the closest the series comes to showing the after, cold, dark, gentle, and beginning. The Firekeeper's tear at the end. In the End of Fire ending, when the Firekeeper kneels and extinguishes the flame, she weeps. The tears are visible. She is doing something she believes is right and crying while she does it. This small detail is one of the most emotionally loaded moments in the game, not because it is dramatic, but because it is specific. She is not uncertain. She has the eyes. She has seen what the world without fire looks like. She has chosen to believe that the darkness is a beginning rather than an end. And she is crying. Because choosing the right thing and finding it easy are not the same experience. Because the flame she is putting out is the thing she has tended since before she can remember, the center of the only existence she has had. The bonfire is not a job for the Firekeeper. It is everything, and she is letting it go. The tear is the game acknowledging, without comment, that the correct choice and the painless choice are not always the same thing. The fire goes out, the darkness comes. She was right, and she cried, and both of those things are true. The ringed city's blessing that became a chain. When Gwyn gave the ringed city to the pygmies, he also gave them the ringed knights, armored warriors whose equipment was literally fused to their bodies. The brand of the ringed knight is described as having been applied specifically to contain and manage the dark soul in their blood. The Pygmy Lords received a city and were told they had been honored. They received knights and were told they had been protected. They received Filianore and were told they had been blessed. Each of these gifts was a layer of control, architectural, military, spiritual, designed to ensure that the most potent darkness in the world stayed in one place and stayed manageable. The genius of the arrangement, from Gwyn's perspective, was that it looked like a gift. The tragedy of it, from the Pygmy perspective, was that it worked so well that the Pygmy Lords eventually stopped being able to imagine existing outside it. By the end of the Ringed City DLC, the last Pygmy King is sitting in the ruin of an elaborate prison that he has spent an age maintaining, and the only guidance he can offer you is to go find the Dark Soul that was always meant to be his inheritance. The blessing became the chain without ever changing its shape. The Pygmies' silent rebellion. The Pygmy Lords in the Ringed City are barely animate. They sit on their thrones in the ruined Great Hall. They do not fight when you enter. They do not call for guards or rise to defend themselves. They simply sit, and the one who speaks tells you where to find what you came for. This passivity has been read in multiple ways. One reading is that the Pygmy Lords have fully succumbed to the same decay that took everything else in the Ringed City. That they are, by this point, simply too old and too hollow to do anything other than persist. Another reading finds something more deliberate in their stillness. They know Gale has come. They know the painting will be made. They are sitting in their inherited prison at the end of time, and they are, in the only way available to beings who have been constrained since the beginning of the current age, choosing not to participate in the continuance of the world that imprisoned them. Their silence is not surrender. It is the refusal to assist with a cycle that was never built for them. They will not link fire. They will not fight. They will wait for the age to end, and they will be there when it does, sitting in their inherited seats, and they will not help the continuation of anything they did not choose. Filianore's true role: guardian or prison warden. Filianore has been described by those who love her as a guardian, a princess who sacrificed her own freedom and eventually her own temporal continuity to protect the Ringed City and its people. Shira, her knight, speaks of her with genuine reverence. The spears of the church fight to preserve her sleep, but the evidence of what she was doing is less straightforwardly protective. Her sleep maintained the time stasis that kept the Ringed City cut off from the rest of the world. The Pygmy Lords could not leave. The dark soul they carried could not spread. The entire mechanism of Filianore's long sleep operated as a containment vessel for the most powerful force in the Dark Souls cosmology, and the contained party were the people Gwyn gave her to protect. She may have believed she was a guardian. She may have been a willing participant in a plan to imprison an entire people through divine affection. Or she may have been another of Gwyn's children, who was given a role that cost them everything without being fully informed of what that role was actually for. Her decayed body in the desert does not answer the question. It only confirms that she paid the price, regardless. Gwyn's fear of the dark, cowardice or wisdom. Gwyn, Lord of Sunlight, was afraid. This is the emotional foundation of the entire Dark Souls series. A king who was powerful enough to defeat the ancient dragons and found a civilization, and who was terrified of what would come after his civilization ended. His fear drove him to link the flame. His fear drove him to give the dark side to all undead humans, binding their dark souls to a cycle of death and resurrection, rather than letting them progress toward an age of dark. His fear drove him to send his daughter to the end of the world to keep the darkest fire contained. The question of whether this fear was wisdom, whether Gwyn correctly identified something about the age of dark that justified what he did to prevent it, or cowardice, whether he simply could not accept his own mortality and the mortality of his age, and did catastrophic damage to avoid facing it, is the philosophical question the series has been debating since its first game. Dark Souls 3 does not resolve it. It simply shows you the result. A world that has been prolonged past its natural end. A cycle that has produced more suffering than the darkness it was designed to prevent. And a final boss that is, in its second phase, Gwyn himself, still fighting to keep the flame alive, even now. Whether the Ashen One was chosen or arbitrary, the opening narration of Dark Souls 3 says the Ashen One will rise. The Lords of Cinder are resurrected to be returned to their thrones. The Firekeeper is in place to receive whoever arrives. Everything is structured around the assumption that a champion will come, but there are many Ashen Ones. The Cemetery of Ash holds more than you. The graves are everywhere, most of them still occupied. The character creation screen implies that you are one specific person, but the game's multiplayer infrastructure implies that many versions of the same journey are happening simultaneously across different worlds. Were you chosen specifically? Is there something about the particular Ash you are that makes your journey more likely to succeed than the hundreds of other graves? Or is the system designed to produce champions the way a lottery produces winners, reliably on average, with no specific winner predetermined, simply by running enough iterations? The Firekeeper does not know you when you arrive. She has presumably greeted others before. The coiled sword accepts anyone strong enough to pull it free. The mystery of whether you were chosen, or simply the one who happened to wake up and keep going, is one the game frames as significance and never confirms as more than persistence. The second coiled sword's missing bell, the coiled sword fragment found in the untended graves, carries the description that it served its purpose long ago. It is the remains of a coiled sword that was planted, that kindled a fire, that did what coiled swords do, and then persisted as a fragment after the fire it lit had gone out. This implies a complete second cycle, one that happened in the dark Firelink Shrine and concluded. A champion came, a fire was lit, a coiled sword was planted, and then the fire went out, and the champion was gone, and the only thing left was the fragment, the bell above the dark shrine, or the bells of awakening that in the original game signaled that a champion was making their attempt, did not toll. Champion Gunda waited for a bell that never rang. The Firekeeper died without lighting the bonfire. Whatever the full shape of that interrupted cycle was, it left behind only a fragment of a sword and an abandoned champion and a dead keeper. All three of these things are things you encounter in your own journey. The game is asking whether your cycle ends the same way, and it asks the question quietly, in the description of a small item on the floor of a dark room. What Firelink Shrine actually is, Firelink Shrine cannot be walked to. In every other area of Dark Souls 3, you can physically travel to adjacent locations. You can walk from Lothric to the Undead Settlement, from the Ringed City through the Dreg Heap. But Firelink Shrine is accessible only through bonfire teleportation. There is no path that leads to it physically. You are placed there, and you leave from there, and the ground it stands on has no ordinary geography, connecting it to the rest of the world. The untended graves, which appears to be the same shrine in a different time, can be physically walked to. It connects to the rest of the world. This means the living Firelink Shrine exists in a different category from every other location in the game. It is a space outside the collapsing world, maintained by the fire and the Firekeeper, as a space between spaces. The NPCs who come to it arrive, and the manner of their arrival is sometimes left unexplained. It is, in the fullest sense, a hub, not a location but a function, a place that exists, because the cycle requires somewhere for champions to prepare before they go back out into the dying world. What it is, under the function, when the cycle ends and the fire goes out, is exactly what the untended grave shows you. A dark, empty room, with no one tending the flame and nothing left to do. Will the cycle ever end? This is the question that Dark Souls 3 is, in its deepest architecture, asking. Every mystery in this game is a facet of it. The untended grave suggests cycles can complete and leave only darkness. The usurpation of fire suggests cycles can be redirected by someone willing to hollow themselves enough to seize them. The end of fire suggests cycles can be consciously concluded by someone willing to let the fire die with kindness. The ringed city exists at the literal end of everything, the place where the cycle has already played out past the final boss, past the last kingdom, past the last pygmy lord on their throne. Gael at the bottom of that desert is fighting you with the entire inheritance of human darkness inside him, and what he wants from you is not victory. He wants the painter to have her pigment. He wants one small act of creation to survive the end of the cycle. He went hollow and enormous and past the point of recovery so that a child with a canvas could make something cold and gentle and new. Whether the cycle ever ends depends in the end on whether that counts as an ending. Whether the world the painter makes is a continuation of the same story or the beginning of a different one. Whether a new painted world, made from the blood of the last kings, painted by a girl at the edge of time, is a cycle repeating or a cycle finally, carefully, done. Company Captain Yoshka's true identity. High in a tower above the church of Yoshka in Irithil, reachable only by stepping onto an invisible bridge, a test of faith over empty air. Lives Company Captain Yoshka, leader of the Blades of the Dark Moon and the last survivor of a covenant that has been dormant since before the events of the game. She is tall and pale, with scales around her eyes, tentacle-like growths hanging from her neck, and a tail. She calls Gwyndolin her brother and says Gwyn is her father. She has, by her own description, seen only crows and dragons, which implies she was raised in isolation, possibly in the painted world of Ariamis, far from the main world of Anor Londo and Irital. The community has debated her parentage extensively. The Life Hunt Scythe miracle, acquired through her covenant, contains a description mentioning Aldrich dreaming of a pale girl in hiding as he consumed Gwyndolin, which most readers take as a reference to Priscilla. But Yoshka's visual similarity to Priscilla is striking. Both have tails, scales, the same quality of fragile isolation. Yoshka's chime notes that Gwyndolin gave her the chime along with her name, meaning she had to conceal her identity, that she was known by something else before Gwyndolin renamed her. What she was named before, and by whom, and what she is hiding from, remains genuinely unresolved. The Crow's Nest trades, above Firelink Shrine, accessible through a hidden path along the rafters and a crumbling stone bridge, there is a crow's nest, a giant crow, or at least the sounds and effects of one, accepts certain items and returns others in exchange. This is the same crow that carried you to the Cemetery of Ash at the beginning of the game. Presumably, the same crow that in Dark Souls 1 carried the chosen undead from the undead asylum. The crow does not speak. It does not appear visually. You simply drop an item into the nest and find a different item there when you return. The community has mapped the trades extensively, finding that the crow has preferences. It likes homeward bones, fire bombs, alluring skulls, certain gems. It gives back things that seem arbitrary until you notice they are all items associated with travel, with homecoming, with the idea of going somewhere and returning. The crow carries people and returns things. The mystery is whether it understands what it is doing, whether there is a consciousness behind the trades, or simply a very old bird with very consistent instincts, and whether it understands something about the Firelink Shrine and the cycle that it has never communicated to anyone. Cirrus and the Undead Legion's history. Cirrus of the Sunless Realms is one of the more complex questline characters in Dark Souls 3. A warrior who is hostile to Rosaria's fingers, devoted to her family, and willing to fight on your behalf against specific enemies if you maintain her trust by avoiding the Rosaria Covenant. Her questline culminates in the revelation of her grandfather, Hodrick, a mad phantom who invades at the Pit of Hollows and fights you in a way that makes clear he has been hollowing slowly in that dark pit. Cirrus cries over his remains when the fight is done. The connection to the Undead Legion comes through the Sunless Realms, a location that several item descriptions associate with a kingdom now in shadow, connected to the Dark Moon Covenant and to Gwyndolin's network of lunar devotion. The mystery of Cirrus is less about her personal arc, which the game resolves clearly, and more about what the Sunless Realms actually was, why Hodrick went mad in a pit of hollows, and how the line between a devoted knight and a hollow enemy is drawn in a world where the very devotion that makes you a knight can eventually become the thing that hollows you. Hollow versus undead. What's the difference? One of the cosmological distinctions Dark Souls 3 makes most consistently, but never fully explains, is the difference between being undead and being hollow. Undead are people who have died and cannot stay dead. They return from death, driven by whatever purpose they have not yet completed. The dark sign ensuring their continued existence, past the point where ordinary death would end things. Hollow is what happens to undead, who have lost their purpose. Without a goal, without a drive, without something that tethers you to the act of continuing, the undead fade into the hollow state, empty, aggressive, mindless. In Dark Souls 3, this distinction is further complicated by the unkindled, who are not precisely either. The Ashen One can hollow with increasing dark sigils and become more powerful for it, which upends the assumption that hollowing is simply degradation. Yol draws out true strength from your hollowing. Londor prizes the hollow state as a form of authenticity, the truest version of what an undead is, stripped of the illusions that fire and purpose maintain. The mystery is whether hollowing is a disease or a disclosure, whether the person who hollows is losing themselves or, finally, becoming what they always were underneath the purpose they were using as insulation. The profane flame's sky birth. The profane flame came from the sky. This single detail, confirmed in the pyromancy description, is one of the most cosmologically striking facts in Dark Souls 3, and one of the least discussed. The first flame emerged from within the world, discovered in the dark of primordial earth by the lords who would use it to end the Age of Ancients. The profane flame did not come from within. It fell from outside, in a universe carefully structured around the relationship between the internal forces of fire and dark, Lord Souls and Dark Souls, linking and fading, cycles that operate on the world from within. The arrival of a fire from outside the known framework is deeply strange. Sullivan found it and used it. Yorm became a Lord of Cinder, trying to stop it. The residents of the profane capital burned when it arrived. Nobody in the game explains what it is, where in the sky it originated, or whether its origin outside the cycle gives it a different relationship to the cycle's rules. It burns human flesh specifically, which distinguishes it from ordinary fire. It does not fade, which distinguishes it from the first flame. Whatever it is not part of the system that governs everything else in the game. The old demon king's loneliness. The old demon king is the last of his kind. The boss description makes this explicit in the most mournful way possible. He is the last demon, the final survivor of the catastrophe that was the bed of chaos and the witch of Izalith, and the birth of fire demons from a failed attempt to recreate the first flame. He sits in the smouldering lake surrounded by what remains of his kind, smaller demons, lesser fires, and he is dying. His fire sputters. His health bar does not regenerate after certain attacks the way other bosses do. He's simply running out. The world that produced demons has ended. The conditions that made demons possible, the specific kind of chaotic fire that emerged from Izalith, are not being reproduced. There will not be more. He is not a threat in the way the game's earlier bosses are threats. He is a monument to the end of a lineage, still alive, still fighting with what fire remains in him. Because fighting is what demons do, and he is still a demon, even if he is the last one. Killing him is not a heroic act. It is finishing a process that was already almost done. Creighton of Mirrors. Path of Murder. Creighton the Wanderer is an invasion NPC in both Dark Souls 2 and Dark Souls 3, and the through line of his character across the two games is a pattern of murder so consistent that the community has elevated him to a kind of dark comedy archetype. In Dark Souls 2, he was imprisoned for a string of murders and claimed to be innocent. In Dark Souls 3, he is still at it, now on the Irithyll Bridge invading you while also pursuing his companion Cirrus, apparently in a vendetta, whose origins are lost in whatever bad decision he made in Mirror. His Mirror set describes the Mirror Church Knights as known for their heavy blade technique, which is notable primarily because Creighton's heavy blade technique is, in his case, deployed primarily against people who annoy him or have something he wants. The mystery of Creighton is not what he does, that's consistent, but whether there is somewhere in there an original wrongdoing, a first murder, a moment before which Creighton was merely a knight from Mirror, rather than a man who travels across ages and games leaving corpses. The game does not care enough about Creighton's inner life to tell you. He invades. He dies. He was probably someone's problem even before Dark Souls 2. Igon's devotion to Irina. Igon of Karim is an enormous, menacing knight who speaks in a growl and seems constitutionally hostile to nearly everything. He is Irina of Karim's protector, not in the transactional sense of a hired guard, in the sense of someone who has made a specific person the organizing purpose of their existence. He found Irina. He decided she needed protection. He attached himself to that decision so completely that he names it as his reason for existence. If Irina comes to harm through your actions, Igon will turn on you. If Irina is taken by the darkness of forbidden miracles, Igon will attempt to remove her from your sphere of influence. He does not like you. He tolerates your presence precisely as long as Irina is safe, and not one moment longer. The mystery of Aegon is what happened to produce this devotion. Karim is described as a land of clerics and moral strictness, a place where the use of dark miracles is treated as transgression. Irina has a natural pull toward all knowledge, including dark. Aegon has a natural pull toward violence, that their paths intersected and produced something that looks, in the oblique language of Dark Souls, very much like love, or at least like the kind of ferocious, undiscriminating protectiveness that functions as love in a world without safe conditions for the quieter version, is one of the game's small, unacknowledged kindnesses. The giant's arrow in the undead settlement. A friendly giant sits in a nest at the top of the undead settlement, firing arrows at the hollow enemies below on your behalf. You can identify yourself to him using a white branch, an item that connects to the first Dark Souls character of Dusk of Ulasil, and her connection to the stone guardians of Darkroot Garden. If you carry the branch, the giant recognizes you as a friend and will not target you. He will shoot everything around you while sparing you specifically. This giant has a story. His friend, a young woman, came through the settlement long ago, and he promised to help anyone who carried her sign. She is apparently dead now, her white branch the only thing left, and the giant has been sitting in his nest, honoring that promise ever since. How long has he been there? Who was the young woman? The branches connect to Ulakili lore from the first game, suggesting the friendship spans an enormous stretch of time. The giant does not speak of this. He just shoots. The mystery of the giant's vigil is one of the quietest in the game. A being of enormous size, keeping an enormous promise for someone who can no longer know he is keeping it. Horace's loss of will. Horace the Hushed accompanies Henri of Astora in their quest to find and slay Aldrich. He is quiet. His name suggests he has always been quiet, or that he lost his voice at some point, and loyal, walking beside Henri as they pursued the Devourer of Gods through the game's middle sections. When Henri and Horace part ways to search separately in the catacombs of Carthus, Horace makes his way to a cave near the smouldering lake and hollows. He is there when you find him. Not dead, but gone. Hollow, crouched in a dead end, responding only with violence. Henri, when you tell them what happened, is visibly devastated. This is not the death of an enemy or the loss of an NPC who served their mechanical purpose. This is the sudden hollowing of someone who was still present, still purposeful, still walking beside their companion, and who simply stopped in a cave and could not continue. What caused the hollowing? The catacombs are dark and frightening and full of things that attack. But Horace, by the evidence of the quest line, was not fragile. He was the steadier half of the pair, the one who walked without speaking while Henri provided words. The mystery of his hollowing is that it happened to someone who seemed, by every visible measure, to have enough purpose to continue. Sometimes that is not enough. What happens to Henri on the road? If you follow Henri's quest line without Uria's intervention, without the pilgrim killing Henri and replacing them with a hollow for the wedding, Henri reaches Anor Londo and descends to the Dark Moon tomb alone to face Aldrich. They are not strong enough. You can find their sword embedded in the ground where they finally stopped, marked as a gravestone. The person who spent the entire game hunting Aldrich, who kept walking after Horace hollowed, who continued the journey that their hollow companion could not finish. They made it to Aldrich's resting place and did not survive it. The Henri ending, reached by not following the Lord of Hollow's path, is one of the most quietly devastating conclusions in the game. You helped them get there. You told them Horace had hollowed. You watched them continue anyway. And they went in and didn't come out. The mystery of Henri is not what happened, the sword tells you, but whether, in the logic of a world built on cycles and purpose and the stubborn refusal of the undead to stay dead, Henri found what they were looking for in that moment, whether the confrontation, however it ended, was worth the road that led to it. The Black Hand Hunters' Secret Order. The Black Hands are a group of assassins in service to the royal family of Lothric, mentioned primarily through the equipment of the NPCs Gotthard and Kamui, who appear in the game's world. The Black Hand set describes an order of three-blade hunters who served the king directly, not the public-facing Knights of Lothric, but a private force of killers operating in the king's specific interest. Gotthard arrives dead in the game at a particular story moment, his body blocking a door, his notes revealing that he was trying to reach Aldrich and that something stopped him. The mystery of the Black Hands involves both what they were actually doing in service to the royal family, what specifically a secret order of royal assassins is needed for when Lothric Castle is already full of knights, and what killed Gotthard specifically in that corridor. He made it a long way. He was clearly skilled. Something was both powerful enough to kill him and specific enough to leave him in that particular position, blocking that particular door, as if he was trying to prevent something from getting through, even as he died. Dragonslayer Armor's missing knight. The Dragonslayer Armor boss stands before the entrance to the Grand Archives, enormous and crackling with residual lightning, seemingly moving under its own power. But the confirmed lore, established across item descriptions and the fight itself, is more specific than it first appears. The armor is being animated by the pilgrim butterflies, the faintly luminescent creatures that soar above Lothric Castle and become active adversaries in the fight's second phase. The armor lost its original master long ago. The soul of Dragonslayer Armor describes how the suit lost its master, but was kept moving by an outside force, the butterflies, who use it as a weapon to prevent anyone from reaching the Grand Archives and potentially linking the fire. Who the original knight was is one of the game's unresolved questions. The Dragonslayer set description links this armor to a tradition of Dragonslayer knights who protected Lothric in its founding days, distinct from Ornstein himself. Some readings connect the armor to the brave Dragonslayer mentioned in the Sacred Oath miracle, a third figure who served both the Nameless King and Ornstein. Others have pointed to Hovel. None of this is confirmed. What is confirmed is that a knight once wore this armor, that the armor outlasted them, and that something else decided it should keep fighting, using the ancient metal of a Dragonslayer as a puppet to prevent the cycle's conclusion. The Estus Flask's undying warmth. The Estus Flask is fire, carried in glass. It heals the Ashen One because it is the warmth of a bonfire, concentrated into a portable form. A fragment of the First Flame's healing property, refracted through the specific bonfires that give it shape. Its description across the series has always emphasized this. The Estus is not medicine. It is fire. It heals because fire, at its most fundamental, is life in the Dark Souls cosmology. The mystery of the Estus Flask in the context of Dark Souls 3 is what it means that you are carrying fire through a world where the fire is dying. Every sip of Estus is a consumption of the very thing the game is asking you to decide about. The fire sustains you in your journey to decide whether the fire should continue. You cannot make it to the kiln without the fire's help. You cannot choose to end the fire without the fire having kept you alive long enough to make that choice. The cycle contains itself. The question it is asking, it has already answered by the time you reach it. You have been burning the fire to reach the fire for the entire length of the game. Whether that makes the choice more meaningful or less is something you will have to decide at the bonfire, in the dark, alone. Why Irithyll enemies have human skulls for faces? The dogs of Irithyll are not the only enemies in the city whose faces suggest prior humanity. The Irithyllian slaves, the bent-robed figures who shuffle through the Irithyll dungeon below the main city, appear hollow in a specific way. Their descriptions connect them to the dungeon's regime of torture and endless imprisonment, to the jailers who assisted Sullivan's research into dragon transformation and sorcerer's secrets. The jailers themselves, tall and moving on legs that bend the wrong way, carry weapons that can permanently reduce the player's maximum health. They drain vitality, the opposite of healing, which fits for figures whose purpose was to ensure prisoners never fully recovered. The human skull quality visible in the Urethal dogs and the specific degradation visible in the city's lowest level inhabitants suggest that Sullivan's research was not confined to theoretical sorcery. The population of Urethal, those who did not become Silver Knights or serve the Way of White, were used in the dungeon, in the research programs, in the kennels above. Urethal is a beautiful city. Whatever it cost to maintain that beauty was paid by people who are now barely recognizable as people. Half-Light and the Spear of the Church. Half-Light. Spear of the Church is the boss of the Church of Filianor in the Ringed City, a unique encounter in that it can be replaced by another player invading to take the spear's role as a defender of Filianor's church. If no player is available, Half-Light fills the role. A pilgrim, apparently not a named figure of great significance, simply the person who was in the right position when the Covenant needed someone. This is quietly significant. The most sacred remaining institution in the Ringed City, the last line of defense for Gwyn's sleeping daughter, is defended by whoever happens to be there. Not a chosen champion, not a powerful knight, a pilgrim who knelt at the altar and accepted the responsibility. The mystery of Half-Light is exactly that smallness. In a game full of lords and gods and ancient warriors and legendary figures, the person defending the most sacred space at the end of the world is a nobody. This might be the most honest thing Dark Souls 3 says about who actually keeps the world running, while the great figures pursue their great agendas. Andre's hammer never changes. Andre of Astora has the same hammer in Dark Souls 3 that he had in Dark Souls 1. The same animation, the same sound, the same patient competence. The lore does not acknowledge this. No NPC remarks on his longevity. He does not, as far as any dialogue suggests, think of himself as a figure of historical significance. He is a blacksmith. He upgrades weapons. He is there when you arrive, and he will be there when you leave. The hammer descends at the same speed it always has. There is something in this, in the image of an immortal craftsman working at the same forge across the entire span of the series. Neither hero nor villain, simply good at his trade and present, that captures something about what continuity actually looks like on the ground level, below the Lords of Cinder and the Firekeepers and the Serpents with their 1,000-year plans. The world keeps burning and rebuilding, and the great figures clash and fall and rise again, and Andre hammers something and waits for the next customer. He will probably be there for whatever comes after the Age of Dark 2. The profane greatsword and its forbidden fire. Sullivan's right-hand weapon, the profane greatsword, carries fire that the description identifies as profane, connected to the flame born of the sky that consumed the profaned capital. This is not the fire of the first flame or the fire of the bonfires or the fire of chaos from Izalith. It is specifically the fire that fell from outside the world, the fire that Sullivan found in the ruined capital and turned into the foundation of his personal power. He built his entire identity around that flame. His left hand holds the Greatsword of Judgment, a weapon outwardly associated with the Dark Moon Covenant's traditions, but secretly imbued with sorceries, representing the false loyalty he performed while gathering power. One sword is his authentic connection to the profane flame's outside world origin. The other is his performance of legitimate authority. Together, they describe a man who was always two things simultaneously: the boy from the painted world, who found a strange fire and wanted it, and the pontiff, who learned that appearing to uphold the existing order while actually dismantling it from inside was more effective than open opposition. Both swords are drawn in the fight. Both aspects of him attack at once. The Dreg Heap's accumulated history. The Dreg Heap is the transitional zone between the main game and the Ringed City DLC, a vast pile of debris falling from the sky into a void, containing architectural fragments from across the history of the series. You can identify pieces of Earthen Peak from Dark Souls 2, elements of the Cathedral of the Deep, sections of structures that don't correspond to any specific location in the available game world. The Dreg Heap is the residue of the world collapsing. As the Age of Fire ends and geographies converge, the overflow falls into the space between worlds. It is the history of the series made literal and spatial. Not a timeline, but a pile, with the oldest layers at the bottom and the most recent near the top. The angel-like creatures that inhabit it, beings that rise toward an ascension they believe waits above, despite nothing confirmed waiting above, are among the most visually striking and lore-rich enemies in the DLC. Their description connects them to a faith that formed in the Ringed City as the world ended. A belief that rising was salvation, that the light above the pile was divine rather than simply the sky. In the Dreg Heap, even the hope has gotten confused with the architecture. Orbek and the Usurpation. Orbek of Vinheim is a sorcerer who comes to Firelink Shrine if you meet certain intelligence requirements and invite his assistance. He sells sorceries. He is studious, reserved, and vaguely worried about his own relevance in a world that seems increasingly hostile to the scholarly life. Uria's questline, if pursued, requires you to kill Orbek. She identifies him as someone who has proclaimed himself Lord of Hollows, and therefore a threat to your own claim. The threat seems absurd in context. Orbek is not hollow, is not pursuing the Dark Sigil mechanic, has no apparent connection to Londor's agenda. But Uria is not mistaken about the game's mechanics. Orbek, if allowed to complete his own questline, finds his ashes in the Grand Archives after you summon him for the Lothric Prince's fight. He goes there, achieves what he came for, and dies doing something he chose. There is something in Uria naming this mild academic, a rival for the Hollow Throne, that tells you everything about the paranoia of Londor's project. Any life lived with its own purpose is, from Londor's perspective, a threat to the purpose Londor is imposing. Orbek's crime was having his own ending. Leonhard and Rosaria's true goal. Leonhard the Ringfinger arrives in Firelink Shrine as the first NPC to offer you multiplayer invasion items. A striking introduction for a man who turns out to have a deeply personal and strange relationship with Rosaria, Mother of Rebirth. He's devoted to her in a way the game never fully explains. He kills her at some point in his questline, stealing her soul and fleeing, and his reason is never made explicit. The community's reading is that Leonhard understood something about Rosaria's nature, or her captivity in the Cathedral of the Deep, that made her death, to him, an act of mercy or liberation, rather than betrayal. His equipment, the Crescent Moon Sword and the Red-Eye Orb he gives you, connect to lunar imagery and the covenant of invaders. He exists at the intersection of two things that seem opposed: the lunar devotion that connect to the Dark Moon Knights and the violent invasion culture of the Red Eyes. whatever his genuine allegiance is, to Rosaria specifically, to some principle she represented, or simply to himself. He acts on it alone, without explanation, in a way that leaves you with her soul and no context for what it means that he had it. The Dark Sign's true author. The Dark Sign, the mark branded on every undead in the Dark Souls universe, the curse that prevents death from being permanent, and that slowly hollows the branded as it accumulates, is attributed throughout the series to Gwyn, Lord of Sunlight, who distributed it among the humans of his kingdom to prevent the natural transition into the Age of Dark. But the specific mechanism and origin of the Dark Sign is one of those details the series discusses through its consequences rather than its causes. Gwyn used the Dark Sign. Whether he created it, discovered it, or repurposed something that already existed in the deep structure of the world, whether the Dark Sign is Gwyn's invention or simply Gwyn's deployment of a property that was always latent in the Dark Soul, is never resolved. The undead curse that defines the experience of every player character in the series, the central condition of the world you inhabit, arrives without a clean origin story. There is no flashback, no item that says Gwyn made this. There are only the consequences, the branded, the hollow, the cycle, the world structured around managing a mark whose author is assumed rather than confirmed. The Farron Ring's lost connection. The Farron Ring is a reward given to you by Hawkwood after you defeat the Abyss Watchers. A ring that enhances the weapon skills of curved swords, described as having been cherished by the Undead Legion. It is not a powerful ring in the mechanical sense. Its value is entirely in what it represents. An item passed through the hands of the Abyss Watchers, now given to you by the man who deserted them with no ceremony and no explanation. Hawkwood does not explain why he has it. He does not say what the ring meant to the Legion or to him when he wore it. He gives it to you because you killed the thing he left before it destroyed itself completely, and that seems to settle some accounting between him and the Legion's memory. The ring is a connection to the Abyss Watchers' identity as curved sword fighters, as fast and unpredictable warriors who relied on skill over strength. It is also, in Hawkwood's hands, the possession of someone who kept it after deserting and before knowing what to do with it. The mystery of the Farron Ring is the same as the mystery of Hawkwood. What do you hold on to from a thing you left when you are no longer sure you made the right choice in leaving? The Grand Archives Scholars' Wax Ritual. The scholars of the Grand Archives in Lothric Castle practice something that looks, from the outside, deeply strange. They dip their heads into vats of wax, covering their faces and skulls with a hard white shell before resuming their study. The wax pool is an actual mechanic. You can do the same thing, and it temporarily provides resistance to the curse effects emitted by certain curse-rotted Greatwood descendants in the archives. But the scholars do it not as combat preparation, but as intellectual protection. The lore around the Grand Archives implies that certain books and scrolls within it contain knowledge so dangerous that direct exposure through reading or through the ambient emanation of texts that were never meant to be read by ordinary minds produces a specific kind of madness. The wax is insulation. It is the archive's institutional response to the fact that some of what they have collected is actively harmful to the people studying it. The mystery is what those texts contain. What knowledge requires a hard shell of wax over a scholar's head to be safely approached? Big Hat Logan went mad pursuing Seath's secrets. The Crystal Sages went pale and diminished. The Grand Archives Wax Ritual is a building full of people who decided that there was knowledge worth pursuing enough to accept these measures, and the wax tells you everything about the cost without saying anything about what they found. The dilapidated bridge and the fate of undead pilgrims. Near the beginning of the game, in the undead settlement, there is a broken bridge, a structure that once provided access to Lothric from below, now collapsed, its far end hanging over nothing. Along the path leading to this bridge are the bodies of the undead pilgrims who walked the road of sacrifice toward Lothric and did not complete the journey. The game does not name them. They are not questline characters. They are simply the accumulated evidence of the process, of the system that requires unkindled champions to walk this road, combined with the reality that most of the unkindled do not make it. The pilgrims who failed became the undead settlement's population, or they became the pilgrims of Lundor, if Yoel's people are any indication, or they became hollow in a ditch beside the road. The broken bridge is the physical metaphor for everything the undead settlement represents, a place where the journey was supposed to be a passage and instead became a destination, because passage was not guaranteed and the people who failed still had to go somewhere. The Irithel Dungeon's lost prisoners. The Irithel Dungeon is, to put it gently, among the most upsetting locations in the entire series. It is a gulag, a series of cells overseen by Sullivan's jailers, populated by prisoners who have been there for long enough that some of them are barely identifiable. You find Sigurd in a cell, having fallen through a sewer. You find Carla, the dark sorcery's teacher, who mentions being from Vinheim's sorceress tradition. The prisoners who cannot speak, who fill the remaining cells, are never named and never explain themselves. Their equipment and appearance suggest origins in multiple different kingdoms and factions. They were brought here from elsewhere, imprisoned for possessing knowledge or power that Sullivan wanted contained or extracted. The jailer's long arms and distorted bodies suggest the same research done to Irithil's citizens was done here with more deliberate application. What each prisoner's original crime was, what knowledge was taken from them, whether any of them knew each other before arriving here. All of this is present in the architecture of the dungeon and the specific detail of its design, and none of it is told to you directly. You free the ones you can, the rest remain. The Millwood Greatbow and a war with no record. The Millwood Greatbow is the largest bow in the game, a weapon capable of firing great arrows at distances that make it genuinely threatening as both a combat tool and a spatial statement. Something about wielding a bow the size of a person carries a specific message about the tradition it comes from. Its description identifies it as having been used in a great battle long past, when the Knights of Millwood faced the mighty dragons, a war against dragons fought by a kingdom that no longer exists, using a weapon so large it needed a great arrow to match it. The Millwood Knights in the painted world of Arendelle are the survivors of whatever that war produced, and the bow they carried is the evidence that Millwood once had the resources and the will to fight at that scale. The dragons they fought, were they the ancient everlasting dragons of the First Age, or lesser drakes descended from them, or something else entirely? Did they win? The kingdom is gone. The knights are in a painting. The bow is enormous and still works. Whatever Millwood was, it produced this weapon and these warriors, and then ended, and the game does not tell you which part of that sequence was Millwood's fault, and which was simply the world. The pale shade of Lundor's silent vigil. If you fail Yoel's questline, if Yoel dies before giving you all 5 dark sigils, or if you heal the sigils before Yuria appears, 2 things happen. Yuria does not come to Firelink Shrine, and the Lundor pale shade invades you in Farron Keep and Irithel. The Pale Shade is a silent, quick, aggression-first phantom who arrives without context and fights without words. The equipment they drop is the Pale Shade set. Armor described as belonging to a shadow who served Yuria, who in turn served Kati. This means the Pale Shade is one of Lundor's operatives, sent to punish you specifically for failing the questline. Not for being an enemy of Lundor, for failing to properly become what Lundor needed. The Pale Shade's invasions are consequential rather than hostile in the usual sense. They are the Church of Lundor's response to a candidate who did not perform as required. The mystery of the Pale Shade is in their silence. They invade, they fight, they die or kill, and they explain nothing. They are a message from Carter delivered without words, through violence, in the places where you were supposed to be doing something you failed to do. The Estus Shard and the spread of Fireling's warmth. The Estus Shard scattered throughout the world of Dark Souls. 3 are fragments of the same fire that powers your Estus flask. Pieces of the bonfire's warmth, embedded in unlikely locations across the collapsing world. The Firekeeper can use them to increase the number of uses your flask provides, but she cannot create them, and she cannot explain where they came from. The description of the Estus Shard says only that it is a shard of an Estus flask that can be given to the Firekeeper for reinforcement. But why are they there? Who placed them? The world of Dark Souls 3 is not hospitable to the Ashen One. Everything in it is trying to kill you, and the people who might have helped are either hollow or dead. The Estus Shards scattered across hostile territory are the game's closest acknowledgement that something in the structure of the cycle is trying to help you succeed. Whether that is the first flame itself, distributing its warmth in advance of the champion it knew would need it, or some older arrangement built into the world's architecture long before you arrived. The shards are where they are, and they were there before you came, and someone or something put them there, knowing you were coming.